Okay. Good afternoon, colleagues. Now that Delegate Embry is here, grace us with her presence, we're going to go ahead and start our bill hearings. Yes. Delegate Embry, you're first. Yes. If you'd like to bring up your panel.
Yes, they're on their way up. Thank you so much.
We're very excited to have you.
Well, thank you. Thank you. Yeah, please. Chair and Vice Chair and committee members, thank you so much for having us. I'm here again. This time it's House Bill 419. It's the Ratepayer Protection Act. It's an attempt to modify the Strategic Infrastructure Development and Enhancement Law, also known as STRIDE. When STRIDE was passed in 2013, the intent was to reduce leaks from aging in gas infrastructure. But unfortunately, the bill, which gave utilities a highly lucrative accelerated cost recovery incentive to spend on gas infrastructure, was silent on an evaluation of cost effectiveness, assessment of alternatives, and a prioritization of risk. And we're seeing the results of that silence in our gas bills today. David Lapp will talk about the spending reports that the Office of People's Counsel has done, showing that the utilities have spent over $2 billion on gas infrastructure under STRIDE thus far, and we'll spend many, many more billions if we do nothing. And all of that spending, those billions plus interest, is being collected from ratepayers. And I'm sure you are all receiving calls and emails from some of your constituents, I certainly am, with their record high gas bills. Many of them have submitted testimony for this hearing. In Baltimore, where I'm from, BG&E delivery rates have almost tripled over the past 15 years, and people are literally having to choose between heating their homes and buying groceries. And those who can't heat their homes are now seeing their power shut off. Although I appreciate that the utilities have paused the shutoffs in this cold winter. STRIDE is also not delivered on safety. That was the purpose. It is not. Leaks have increased per year since the enactment of STRIDE, and it is past time to revisit this legislation. Today, the Public Service Commission is here to speak in favor of the bill. We've worked with them on amendments that make the bill stronger and make the bill clearer. The amendments include an adjustment of the notice requirements, so the focus is on a process overseen by the Commission instead of legislating a fixed schedule, and I know that was a concern of the utilities, so I think we've strengthened the bill in that way. Chair Hoover will describe the amendments in more detail, and we'll get them to you as soon as they're finalized, but I wanted to thank him and his staff for making this bill better. There are two important changes since 2013 when STRIDE was passed. First, there have been significant advances in pipe leak detection technologies, meaning that it's commercially viable now and technologically possible to replace and repair instead of wholesale replace gas infrastructure. We have also created policies that promote the electrification of buildings, such as the Climate Solutions Now Act, and under the leadership of this committee, we have undertaken major steps towards reducing our state's overall greenhouse gas emissions. And so it's reasonable to predict that in the coming decades, the number of Marylanders using gas in their home and in their businesses will decrease. And that means the number of people who have to pay for the cost of STRIDE spending will shrink. And so the cost will increase for that pool of people, many of whom will not be able to afford to electrify their homes and businesses and must remain with gas and bear the brunt of these rate increases. This bill is not a repeal of STRIDE. It's a modest bill. It makes modest changes to the current law to ensure that gas infrastructure work that's billed to our utility customers through the accelerated cost recovery of STRIDE is actually necessary to ensure safety and uses the most cost-effective tools to do so. And I want to just reiterate, I know it's been said here and will be said by others today, that the regulated gas utilities are already required to maintain the safety of their gas infrastructure regardless of STRIDE, whether or not STRIDE exists. Even if we were to repeal STRIDE, that requirement would exist and would remain, as would the PSC's regulatory and financial oversight of that spending. This bill does three essential things. It requires the gas utilities who want to take advantage of STRIDE to convince the PSC that their plan has prioritized the replacement of pipes based on their safety risk. So actually prioritize based on safety is the most cost-effective strategy and relies on leak detection and repair and non-pipeline alternatives where feasible. And finally, provides adequate notice to ratepayers so they can opt out of the costs and have time to do so if they choose to electrify. Again, these are common sense adjustments that restore the legislation to its original purpose and protect consumers from runaway costs. I ask for a favorable report. Thank you.
Good afternoon, Chair Wilson, members of the committee. David Lapp for the Office of People's Counsel. Thanks for the opportunity to testify today. Stride reform is the single most important action Maryland can take to address the massive utility customer bills that folks are facing today. Our office, state agencies, and elected officials are being flooded with calls from customers who are now seeing the devastating impact of 10 years of Stride and its promotion of aggressive gas infrastructure spending. BGE's gas delivery rates have tripled since 2010 and increased by 58% in just the last 6 years. Please see the hockey stick graphs on pages 3 to 4 of our written testimony showing how much delivery rates have increased for BGE and Columbia Gas following the enactment of Stride. Utilities generate higher profits by spending customer money with the government's approval, whether or not that spending is needed or wise. Stride means spending billions on brand new gas systems with a highly questionable future given stiff competition from modern technology, electric technologies. Unfortunately, today we are just seeing the beginning of the customer bill impacts of Stride. Utilities are only about 1/3 of the way through their programs and won't complete them for another 20 years. Customers today have only paid about 3% of what it will cost customers in the coming decades to complete Stride. BGE still has about $3 billion in future spending to replace its old gas system, and Washington Gas more than $4 billion. Without curbing the fast rate of spending, in just about 10 years, most Maryland gas customers will be paying about double the distribution rates they are paying today, and that could be much higher depending on gas supply prices and customer departures. We ask for a favorable report. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. My name is Emily Scar. I'm a senior advisor with Maryland PIRG, the statewide consumer group based in Baltimore, here in support of HB 419. Utility regulation might seem complicated, but it's pretty simple. The more a utility spends on its infrastructure, the larger its opportunity to profit. This creates a powerful incentive for wasteful spending, and we rely on you and our regulators to keep a careful watch. Unfortunately, the Stride Law of 2013, which was intended to improve the safety of our gas system, has gone terribly wrong. That's because the law lacks critical safeguards on spending. As written, Stride effectively increases the incentive to spend wastefully, driving up our rates and utility profits, but without improving utility service in any proportion. Spending, rates, and profits are climbing. I also have some pretty charts in my testimony you should look at. BGE and Columbia Gas have been the most aggressive in their spending, but if you don't intervene, Washington Gas and their customers will likely be next. To make matters worse, the law also lacks language requiring spending to prioritize safety, and thus Stride has not delivered on safety promises. According to federal data, BG&E's hazardous leaks per year have increased from 3,000 in 2014 to 4,000 in 2023, despite BG&E spending $1.4 billion on its pipeline replacement project and passing those costs on to customers. A gas pipeline replacement program that properly prioritizes gas leaks will cost less, meaning smaller bill increases, while also making our communities safer. Gas utilities are legally required to maintain the safety of the system without increased financial incentives. So fundamentally, Maryland PIRG thinks the Stride Law should be repealed. Short of that, we wholeheartedly support adding safeguards to the law to control costs and to focus on fixing leaks through a pipe repair or replacement as outlined by HB 419. We support the amendments being proposed by the PSC to clarify the proposal and codify existing notice provisions, and we thank the sponsor and the Commission for working together to come to compromise. We urge the legislature to intervene now to repeal or reform Stride before things get worse for gas customers across the state. Thank you.
Good afternoon, Chair, Vice Chair, and members of this committee. I'm Laurel Peltier, and I wear two hats. I am AARP's utility advocate, and I also chair Energy Advocates, and we focus on low income. I also, like you, work out in the field, and I work directly with families trying to keep their power on, so I'm seeing firsthand what's going on. To give you an idea, there's always these big numbers thrown around, and I just wanted to share why I think If you live in the BG&E territory and you have a home that's heated by gas, which is 660,000 accounts, about a third of the state, the reason you're getting so many calls are because of these numbers. In 2021, this is just a gas bill, just the amount people are spending to heat their homes, was about $1,300 for the year, for the winter. You know, you pay your heating bill mostly from November through March. 2024, it had jumped all the way to $1,600, and in 4 short years, that bill is $1,700. It means that in 2025, all these families will take $400 more out of their checking account to pay BG&E to build out more, to rebuild basically the gas system. That's why the calls are coming in. And if you add that on to all the electricity issues, people have seen their BG&E bills jump 50%. I see it all the time. Seniors calling in and they're like, how am I going to pay my $2,000 that I'm in arrears? So this bill is very smart because it ensures that infrastructure upgrades are necessary and beneficial, but it strikes a balance between safety and affordability. And it takes a step toward making Maryland's aging population and ensuring that natural gas services remain for all. Thank you.
Delegate Weibel.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I admittedly am not an expert on STRIDE, so hopefully you can help me understand it in totality. So basically, the way I understand it, it allows for current cost recovery. It's what, $2 a month? And if it weren't allowed for current cost recovery, that unrecovered cost would go into rate base, correct?
Yes, the way rates are normally set is the
Okay.
utility incurs the cost, and then they come into rates during a rate case.
So the amount that's unrecovered, is the utility allowed to, I guess, basically charge interest on that unrecovered amount? So I assume the unrecovered cost goes into a pot. Is there interest allowed to accrue on that?
Not under the way rates are normally set. There's a revenue requirement, and the utility can come in for a rate case at any time. What STRIDE does is it allows current or even prospective recovery for cost for the coming year. And the STRIDE surcharge is just the limit. It's not a limit on STRIDE costs overall. It's just a temporary limit before they come into the next rate case. And then all those surcharge costs that fund STRIDE are rolled into base rates. So it's not a $2 limit on STRIDE costs. It's a temporary limit until they come in for a rate case.
So this bill allows the STRIDE surcharge to continue?
Yes, it does.
Okay.
Yes.
So what you're trying to do is basically limit the investment?
Well,
You're saying it's unnecessary, I guess, the way
Well, some of it may be necessary, and they can still pursue that. But what we're trying to do is make sure that they're not they're prioritizing safety for one,
Okay.
and addressing the accelerated nature of it, and looking at cost-effective alternatives. So if there's a cost-effective alternative to replacement. Replacement is treated as a capital cost, but some of the alternatives don't necessarily go into rate base and generate higher profits for the utility and are ultimately cheaper for customers. So this bill would allow continued accelerated recovery for investments that qualify under this language. And certainly we think it just makes sense that a utility should be required to first prioritize safety, and second, to consider cost-effective alternatives to just replacement.
So when a utility comes in to replace pipes under this program, do they do that in advance and they make an application to the PSC?
Yes.
So the PSC then has determined that their replacement is appropriate and potentially a safety hazard, so they authorize the gas pipe replacement?
They review 5-year plans under STRIDE, and then they their project lists for each year.
And are you part of that process?
Yeah, our office does participate in
So
that
do you
process.
oppose those when they come in and ask for that replacement? What's your guys' position?
We have definitely opposed certain of those costs, but not all those costs. It depends. If the commission has already approved the 5-year plan, we may look at some of the project costs and question some of those costs, but we're not opposing, our office is not opposing all of those costs.
Okay. On page 3, line 14, you guys talk about notifying customers affected by proposed projects at least 2 years in advance to allow customers the opportunity to electrify. Can't customers already do that?
So if I may answer that, as someone who is slowly electrifying my house as each gas-powered appliance dies, I'm doing it as I can afford it as time goes on. But if a customer knew that they'd be faced with a dramatic increase in their gas bills, they might want to accelerate that process. So this gives them time to do that, knowing that they're going to be facing a higher cost if they don't. And we have worked with the PSC, because they've suggested, rather than having a fixed 2-year, which I know the utilities had concerns with, instead the amendment, which we'll again share with you as soon as it's done, is more of a structured process so that the PSC itself would oversee that notification so that customers are given the amount of time that's appropriate in that context so they can make those decisions.
So you didn't need a notice from the utility to tell you that it's okay to switch to gas?
Well, I
you did that on your own.
started, but I still have my furnace.
But I'm just wondering, I mean, that notification is going to have an additional cost to it, so I'm just trying to,
Right.
you're adding additional burdens to utilities, but yet you want to reduce costs, and some of those seem to conflict
The
with
reason
each
for the
other.
notice is it costs about $24,000 upfront to put in the new gas pipes, meters, and regulators for each house. The payback for that is $75,000. So if there's a house that is working on electrifying, they might say, oh, I'll get that done so you don't have to spend that $75,000 on my house. That's why the notice is
So
there.
how do we know gas rates are going to go up higher than electric rates? Our electric rates right now are projected to go up 24%.
Yeah, this is just about consumer choice, so that the,
Well, is it?
no, yeah, so that someone.
Seems like it's less consumer choice.
If someone is going to electrify their home, they might want to do it before the work gets done. Maybe not. That's why. They're already doing this notice. It's sort of just codifying what's already happening.
All right, Mr. Lapp, you said about advances in electric technology during your testimony. What, do you have specific advances that you had in mind?
Yeah, I mean, modern electric heat pumps have efficiencies of 4.0 coefficient of performance. That's 4 times, what you can get from, a gas furnace.
They just don't work very well when we had the -5-degree temperatures as we did in Western Maryland.
Well, I have one. The modern ones, the newer technologies definitely do work. I have one in my own home here in Maryland, and we were quite comfortable. We have been quite comfortable all through these winter months. So the modern ones go, can heat below 0 and quite comfortably. There are studies showing that in Maryland's climate, you don't even need the higher end ones. That you can go with, an efficient one, Energy Star rating from EPA. We can get you the study if that would help.
So are there any requirements on the utility outside of STRIDE to replace aging and potentially dangerous gas lines?
Well, the utilities are always replacing infrastructure without STRIDE, whether it be gas or other infrastructure.
But are there other, federal requirements that require them to continually monitor the safety of their gas lines?
There are PHMSA requirements. They do not, to satisfy those requirements, and I'm sure you're going to hear from the utilities about those requirements do not require replacement. You don't have to comply with PHMSA. You can do alternatives, which is what the language in the bill says, is to consider alternatives, such as repair, leak detection. They have some amazing technologies now. They can, put essentially, without digging up, a street, they can put sleeves into
Okay, so you can
gas
slip line a
pipes.
gas line as well. Like what I know they do that with water and sewer lines. You can do that with gas lines.
Yeah, that's
Okay.
right. And
All
it's, yeah, but it's not a capital investment, so the utilities don't earn a profit generally off of some of those investments.
Okay, all right, thank you.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Chairman. And to the sponsor of the bill, I mean, anytime we talk STRIDE, I hear one word alone, that's safety, right? That's why it's there. So when I read the additional comments on the fiscal note, it says that under the bill, it's unknown which projects, and it does say, if any, will not be approved under the bill. So let me just say, under this bill, we're unsure whether there's a necessary project that will not get approved because of this bill. Are you concerned, as the bill's sponsor from Baltimore City, okay, that a project is going to go by the wayside and then we're going to have a catastrophic outcome? And I'm asking through the lens of like me in the committee, I'm going to end up voting for or against the bill, but that's the very first thing I'd be thinking about when I'm trying to consider a vote for or against legislation like this that has me very concerned. That's my first question.
Thank you. It's a great question. And that's what the purpose of this bill is, to actually put safety first. And I know we're talking about cost because that's really important, but the bill put safety first. The intent of the STRIDE bill was safety, but it didn't say that in the language. So what we're doing is empowering the PSC to require the utilities to show that the project they are putting forward, they have prioritized safety above all. It is the most important factor, and that it is cost effective and they've considered alternatives. So it's a great question. It is a priority of mine, and that's why it's a priority in this bill.
But the way the fiscal note's written, it doesn't appear to be a priority. I mean, because it's not saying what you just said. It's saying that they don't know. It is quite possible, according to the fiscal note, that there would be a project that would not get approved because of the bill. That's what the bill's saying.
I mean, I can't speak for the draft or the fiscal note, but a project might not get approved if the PSC didn't find that it was prioritizing safety and was necessary to protect the lives of our constituents.
I mean, if
and our
PSC is going to
residents.
be here today, I may ask the same
Right.
question.
No, I think they're perfect to answer it. Yep.
And then the other thing that actually PSC is referred to in the fiscal note, which is, frankly, the issue of the session this year, which is energy cost, right? PSC advises that the effect on ratepayer, including the state, okay, local government, small business, cannot be determined at this time. So in the fiscal note, I'm not reading a fiscal note. I'm reading a I don't know, and we're not sure. And I don't know if this is a bill that came in sort of like in the 11th hour and we didn't have enough time to do the research. Maybe the bill needs to go to like a summer study so we can actually answer, are we going to kill a project that's essential? Is this going to raise the rates because we are getting rid of the free market consumer options? Frankly, the legislature this year is absolutely going to talk about expanding the multiple ways that we can provide energy in an affordable baseload way. And I believe that this bill, and I'll ask David Lapp the last question, gets to this concern that I have over what cost of energy is to consumers.
Let me just reiterate what this bill is and what it isn't. This is not a repeal of STRIDE, in which case you could probably predict what, we don't know.
And I just, because again, I've read the bill and I'm not really sure, I understand the fiscal note, but I'll go with the bill, and it makes it very clear that this basically requires the gas company to describe each of the projects, including their life expectancy, demonstrate that they have selected and given priority to projects based on the risk of public safety and cost effectiveness, then analyze and compare the cost of the proposed replacements with alternatives to replacement, such as leak detection, targeted retirement, and do that in conjunction with electrification, as well as the notification to allow consumers. Now, this doesn't work for all consumers because I'm assuming, I have Washington Gas and Smeco Electric. So if I choose to electrify, I believe that I won't be paying for STRIDE at all, right?
Correct.
However, I think BGE, it doesn't work that way. Because I feel like there's a lot of misunderstanding of what, to my reading recitation of this bill, and the testimony, the goal really is to make sure that when we started Stride, it wasn't because we wanted to modernize our entire gas system. It was a safety measure. It was to make sure that the most dangerous pipes, the ones that we have not taken care of, not merely because of an age, but because of, detected faults, are still out there. That's my understanding. Am I missing something?
No.
And there is, to say there's a lack of a free market, you have the right to still use gas, as I do.
Yes.
And many people will still have the right. Now, by doing that, I'll participate in Stride. But if you choose at some point to possibly save money, then, and if you feel that the electrification is cheaper, again, I don't think it worked that way at my house. At that point, you can go ahead and electrify it. Just, yeah, I guess depending on where you live, it depends how it impacts you. So I don't really see, I'm missing the free market. I'm sure we'll get to that. But I know that this bill, as we've talked, there was zero intention of getting rid of Stride.
Correct.
It's just making sure that we don't keep tacking on these replacements that are renovations versus the safety issue.
Thank you, yes.
Okay, the next question is Rogers.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Since you addressed part of it, I was going to say, I'll go with a point of personal privilege and obviously thank the sponsor for bringing the bill, but also want to acknowledge Laurel Peltier, who is one of those folks who is actually boots on the ground when folks are out there and when we have power in the parks. And I'm sure she can attest to the fact that my power in the parks are better than Delegate Charkoudian's power in the parks. So I just wanted to make sure we got that on the record. But no, truly, thank you.
Thank you.
Delegate Amp.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And some of the questions / concerns that I have already been addressed a bit, but thank you, Delegate Embry. And I think my question more so goes along the lines of, around where we live. We live in Baltimore, the great city, but it's an old city. It's very old. So thinking about some of the gas lines we have there, they're old, they're embedded, and thinking about the switch to electricity, also thinking about my constituents. And I represent a really, one of the poorer districts in the city, and thinking about those individuals. I know you mentioned you're switching to electricity when you can. I've done the same in some respects, but a lot of my constituents don't necessarily have that liberty, and wanted to get more of a thought process on the decision making or the process of thinking about when you're going into certain communities. You're thinking about that, thinking about the cost part, not just the cost of the actual energy, but actually the cost of the switch for households. And is that being taken into account, thinking about how is that taken into account? How are we going to think about those, just not the rates themselves, but there's individuals who can't afford, to do that. Just want to get a better idea of that.
I mean, this bill is just about the gas cost, but I think there's an opportunity cost there that we're talking about. $24,000 for a house that's going to cost $75,000 to pay back on rate. That's going to go on to the rates. And so the Public Service Commission is having a proceeding on the future of gas and doing some of the strategic planning that's happening outside of this law. That's the regulatory process of, if you're on a cul-de-sac that's got 10 houses, should the BG&E be spending, should we charge those customers $750,000 to upgrade the gas system, or could some of that money be better invested in clean energy alternatives? That's like oversimplification times 10, but those are the kinds of thoughts that the Public Service Commission is looking at to make sure our low-income folks aren't left behind if, wealthier folks move off the gas system, what we can do to make sure their bills are affordable and help folks electrify through financing options if they don't have the upfront cost to put in a new boiler or new heat pump when their boiler goes out or their AC goes out. So those are really important questions, not in this bill, but I'm happy to talk more about it.
We'll talk offline about those. But those are the kind of things I'm always thinking about with my constituents. So.
Delegate Bishop and Delegate Crosby.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. We see bills kind of messing with the entire natural gas industry on a macro scale in the state of Maryland almost every year. Is the goal to just get rid of it? Is that your plan?
Can I say, if I may start, the goal is to protect people who use gas. This bill protects people who use gas from being the ones who bear a growing and disproportionate cost as the delivery.
So from a macroeconomic understanding of the Climate Solutions Now Act, was its purpose to get rid of natural gas?
I'm not here to, others may want to talk about it. I'm just here to talk about it.
But this is another bite at that issue. And where I'm going with this is, in real-world economics, which sometimes misses so many people, if you're operating a natural gas company, the cost goes down per user if you have more users. Would you say that that's true?
What I will say, if I may, is...
I'm sorry, yes or no, is that true?
Well, I'm not an expert, but that sounds like basic economics, yes.
It's called the economies of scale. Why would you invest in Maryland to expand natural gas to have more people on the system, which would potentially drive down the cost, and I'm quite certain that it would, if we have these kinds of bills year after year? From a macroeconomic standpoint, this is a very important policy question I'm asking right now. Why would you?
Stride is just about replacing the existing system, so it's not about expanding.
It's exactly the same thing that I just said. Replacing a system, expanding a system. When you do so, you are driving down the cost of the overall usage of the system because you have more people on it, economies of scale, right?
Stride is increasing. If you can look at the graphs on page 3 to 4, you can see very directly how Stride is increasing distribution rates. So as utilities invest on an accelerated basis, their revenue requirement grows, and that is divided among gas sales. And so the more sales, the lower those go. But unless we're going to deny customers the ability to take advantage of more efficient electric technologies, which is going to happen as time goes on.
No one's denying choice except for you.
This doesn't address anybody's ability to stay on.
You're messing with an industry year in and year out, and you're creating, in economics and in business, you need predictability, sir. And you're creating unpredictability in the marketplace. And as a result, we don't have enough electricity on the grid because of your testimony over the past 10 years that I've been here. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Same thing.
All right, guys, and try to have some questions in these, what we're doing here. I appreciate it. I understand this is a hot topic. Again, to my understanding, and I do understand, I will say I do understand some of my colleagues' chagrin because we may have in the past maybe they think unfairly maligned the natural gas in the use. I don't believe that that's what this bill is doing, so I understand why they may not trust the direction that we're going, and that's why I kind of let people have their voice on this, because I get it. But I hope that that's not the intent, and I also know, I think it's important for you, the bill presenter, and to understand some of the pushback that we're going to receive. And it's maybe more of a trust issue or going through the bill issue to make sure that we're not unintentionally signaling that, we're walking away from said natural gas, because I think that's a general issue. We'll move to the next person, Delegate Crosby.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Quickly, and I know that this was brought up by the chair, but the bill does not revoke Stride. It simply makes them justify the costs. Just looking prospectively, what would this do to potentially a ratepayer, regardless of which zone they are, in the next 1 to 3 years? Like, what rate impact would that give to the individual consumer who is reaching out to all of our offices? And I know that I'm asking you to look into a crystal ball, but just kind of give us some sort of a hint at what you think. And David, maybe you're the best to answer. You don't look thrilled about this question.
Well, I mean, it's an excellent question. Once these infrastructure costs are spent, and BGE is spending this year about $1.5 billion a day on gas infrastructure, or million a day, I'm sorry, on gas infrastructure. And once that is spent and approved by the Public Service Commission, it's really hard to, take that away. So what we can do is stop the rate of that spending. And that has a direct impact on bills, on lowering bills. If we continue, business as usual, rates are going to, double again in about 10 years. And so if we can slow down this spending, nobody is saying stop all spending on gas infrastructure, but if it can be slowed down, and that just means going back to before Stride, where utilities can make their investments, they can replace pipes, they can do other infrastructure investments. It's just not accelerated. And that acceleration is what is driving the rate increases that customers are experiencing today. And if we slow that down, then we're not going to see the rate increase. BGE's gas rates are going, they went up, they were in 2024, they were 85 cents a therm. This year, they're 90 cents. Next year, they're 96 cents a therm. And so we need to stop those increases, and the way we do that is by slowing down the aggressive spending, which really, advances, what Exelon is promising to their investors in terms of rate-based growth and increased profits.
So then taking kind of some of the previous comments a step further, right? What I think is being alluded to is that if something costs $100 and you spread that amongst 10 people, it is going to be cheaper than if you spread it across 9 people. However, I think what you're trying to say here is whether it's 10 or 9 people, that's irrespective. What we're trying to say is if it's going to be $100, we want to make sure it doesn't go to $120 and you're not justifying the price. Or, excuse me, without justifying the increase.
Exactly.
Thank you.
Oh, boy. Delegate Howard.
So it says on page 2, lines 18 through 21, promote gas infrastructure improvements in the state when necessary and appropriate to ensure the safety of the gas system and to provide consistency with state climate policy, which is goals. And we've heard a lot about talk about how goals can sometimes not be reality. Which is more important, public safety or climate policy? And how is that weighted in front of the PSC? Is it weighted? And do you believe that based on updated climate policies and the aggressive climate policy that the state has undertaken, that there would be an increased cost for infrastructure upgrades?
So
And how does that translate?
So the PSC can answer this even better, but this bill cares about safety and it cares about cost effectiveness. The reason the climate goals are built in.
Well, it says climate policy
right, the reason
there.
that's included is because we do have them, and that means we are going to, our Marylanders are going to be moving away from gas infrastructure, and so there'll be fewer, that pot of people will be shrinking. So we want to make sure that that factor exists in the mind of the PSC, that they understand that it's about homeowners having notice, because they don't want to be part of it necessarily. They can choose, but they may not want to be part of a shrinking pool upon whom this burden is going to be
Based on
placed.
the goals of today.
Based on the goals today, which we could change tomorrow. And
Exactly.
The PSC will be considering whatever the goals set by.
But there's a set
This body
cost that
are.
goes into complying with climate policy of today. And that
They
gets
will-
translated to, so how is that weighted? Safety, cost effectiveness, and climate policy. How is the PSC given direction to make those decisions based on the weight of those 3 outcomes?
They are given the discretion to consider it, but we are
So it's
stating as a
subjective.
General Assembly that we believe that that is relevant to their,
So it's subjective?
well,
Yes.
no, I wouldn't say that, but I understand.
Okay.
Would you like to add?
Well,
Okay. Thank you.
Delegate Pippy.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. This question is just for Mr. Lapp. I was reading through some of your testimony. Would it be fair to say that the Climate Solutions Now Act has made our utility rates more expensive?
And we're talking here about gas utility rates, and no, it's not. Climate policy has not affected gas utility rates. It's the spending on Stride. I mean,
See,
I
in your
don't.
testimony, you reference in the presentation that I'm attached to this bill, you reference the Climate Solutions Now Act multiple times, and that your testimony in support of this legislation is because you're trying to stay in line with the state's environmental policies. Is that fair to say?
I'm here primarily, and because this is a huge ratepayer issue. The problem is that if the state, these investments are made and they're depreciated over an extended period of time, 70 years, some of them, 60, 70 years. And so if investments are made that are not going to actually be used over that period of time, we have the risk of stranded costs. And in the meantime, if customers are leaving the gas system, either because they're choosing to just use efficient electric technologies, or because the state policy or federal policy is trying to reduce gas consumption, those costs don't go away. Those costs stay. And so whatever customers are on the system, they have to pay more and more. And eventually, it could become uneconomic to just maintain those pipes for a small number of customers. The cost of operating the system, 10, 20 years, if that's the direction the state is going. So it's not a good idea to make long-term investments without considering what's on the horizon. Now, maybe that'll all go away, but we think, based on modern electric technologies, there is going to be decline, in gas consumption over time. We're already seeing it. Today, electric heat pumps are outselling gas furnaces on a nationwide basis.
Yeah, so here's the thing. Beginning this year, we had presentations from the Department of Energy. We had presentations from PJM, and what we're finding is that there's upset Marylanders all over the place about utility rates, and then we see a conflict with our climate goals. There seems to be a disconnect between achieving our net zero goals in reality. And so what I see with your testimony, respectfully, and look, you've done other good work on the transmission lines, and I've been following you guys with that, but with this, it seems as if you've just accepted the fact that there's not going to be any change in the state's climate goals. And so your testimony in support of this bill is assuming that we make zero changes and that there's going to be a continual phasing out of all the fossil fuels in the state. And that just doesn't seem realistic. And I know your goal is to protect the ratepayers in line with the climate goals, but I feel like there's a disconnect between those two goals. Protecting the ratepayers while trying to be net zero.
I want to be crystal clear. I would be here testifying the same if the state had zero climate goals. This program is accelerating infrastructure spending without considering cost-effective alternatives, and that accelerated spending is leading directly to higher rates and higher bills for customers, regardless of climate policy. This is this is not about climate policy. This is about high rates.
Yeah, it is for everybody else, respectfully. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So from what I'm gathering, what you've stated is the primary goal of this bill is safety. And one of the other goals is choice. So if safety is the primary goal, I mean, what's the worst case scenario? What's the worst case, if public safety, if safety is the most important goal, what is the worst case scenario?
I mean, the worst case scenario, I think, is that it changes nothing, which we don't anticipate to be true.
The worst case scenarios were wrong. They're doing everything, spending cost effectively, addressing safety risks, and so our bills don't go down.
Well, I'm more asking,
from a safety perspective, that regardless of this law, our gas utilities are responsible for maintaining the safety of the system. Arguably, the reason, if there's concerns about all of a sudden in 2012, the pipes weren't safe, it's their job to have been maintaining those pipes. That stays the same. So I don't know if we're understanding your question, but nothing changes as far as the safety requirement on the gas utilities and on the PSC's job to approve spending to maintain the safety of the system.
Let me rephrase. If everything goes wrong, what is the worst case scenario?
Do you mean if there's explosions of gas?
Oh, yeah.
That is the worst case scenario, and that is why.
And that happens.
That happens, although.
Didn't that happen in Silver Spring a few years ago?
Yes,
in an apartment building?
to address, if we have on our website some FAQs, and one of those FAQs walks through a lot of the recent explosions in Maryland, and those explosions would not have been prevented by Stride. They're usually a maintenance worker forgets to shut off a valve, a car strikes a meter, and those are identified there. We actually One of the examples, that utilities have used to support STRIDE is an explosion that happened up in Massachusetts, where the explosion occurred when Massachusetts was actually doing under its STRIDE program work, and a maintenance worker didn't do something right while it was doing that work, and that caused an explosion that killed a teenager. And that was during the STRIDE work. So, when you're dealing with combustion,
I'm talking more about the larger picture. As my colleagues keep pointing out that we have to in some way ensure that we have lower prices by burning more fossil fuels or by burning more gas. I want to point out that if you want to have true choice, then maybe not everybody wants to bring natural gas into their home or into their building or down their street block where it could explode, often does explode, and kills a lot of people. So I don't know, I would imagine that you should be able to make that choice for yourself is my.
Thank you,
I
yes.
think I'm done, sorry.
We agree.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Just a couple questions. When we're talking about STRIDE and we're talking about the bill and we're talking about rates and we're talking about cost to people, how much, like percentage-wise, how much is STRIDE affecting this super increase we've seen in our energy costs?
You have an answer.
STRIDE has been, in the past, it's for Baltimore Gas and Electric, it's been, in the neighborhood of 40 to 50% of its infrastructure spending that is driving rates up. Today, it's
so
more like.
So it's drove up the rates 40 to 50%? Is that what you just said?
I'm talking about distribution rates.
Okay, my question is, how much of the increase in cost is STRIDE affecting today? 50% the increase?
Well, this year, the work that BGE is doing on gas replacement, which is actually being done in STRIDE equivalent multi-year rate plan, it's about 30%
So
of
your
the cost.
comment is it's increasing my rates 30%. Is that what you just said?
I want to say that it's 30% of the gas
No,
infrastructure
my question is, how
spending.
much is this STRIDE program affecting my increase in costs for gas today?
I don't know that off the top of my head. It's,
Well,
that's right.
I'd like to hear that because I don't know that it's as big an issue as we're talking about. The other question is your assertion that BG&E or whoever these providers are using this for profit?
Yes, absolutely.
Okay, but it's for safety. So how do you determine that to be profit? Do you know what's going to fail? Or we have a crystal ball that we know, or what's going to fail?
Yeah, I mean, they're replacing existing systems. So anything, and the utilities have said this, before the Public Service Committee, anything they do with gas is safety because gas is combustible. So when they go in and replace a whole neighborhood of gas pipes, yes, that at some level improves safety. The question is whether there are cost-effective alternatives to the wholesale replacement.
Okay.
But and whether there are alternatives that don't grow their rate base. And their rate base is what they earn their profits from. And so when they do replacement, they grow their rate base. When they do some other things, it won't grow their rate base and they won't profit. So it does affect their profits in a pretty big way.
Have you, we visited the PJM, and the question was asked up there, what are we doing for baseload energy? What's PJM doing for that? You know what PJM's answer was? We're actively pursuing gas. That's what they're doing. Nuclear is 8 to 10 years out, whatever we want to hear on that. They're not sitting about for baseload. That is the answer right now, according to PJM. Are you aware of that?
Yeah, I mean, I'm happy to talk about that, but this has nothing to do with
It has a lot to do with it.
Gas power stations, which is.
Sorry. Is this bill helping? Is it going to encourage gas to come back to Maryland, or is it going to discourage them?
I don't think it has anything to do with, gas generation.
You don't think that, okay. The last thing I'll mention is that when you made a comment about natural gas and electric. When you have an area that has both available to you, gas and electric, I will submit, just because I just went through it, that people will choose gas over electric for a heat pump. That's, but you know, your comments, I get it, except in an area where I only have electric, of course, I'm going to electric's the answer, but where I have gas and electric, the outrageous number will be they'll do the gas. But thank you for your testimony. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Dave, let me make, so I want to understand, when these utilities make an investment, don't they get a guarantee of all their money back, right?
Yes.
And a percentage on top of that, correct?
Yes, to be clear, the utilities make a capital investment, and they're guaranteed an opportunity, which in effect is a guarantee, but it's an opportunity to earn a return on that investment. So they get a return of the investment itself, and then they get a return on top of that.
Do you know what that percentage is?
Yeah, that return, what customers pay is 9 to 10%.
Right, so the more money they spend, the more of a return they would get, correct?
Absolutely,
So the more things that they find to repair, ergo the more money they spend, and they're kind of playing with house money because they're going to they will spend their money, or in this case, I think they get an advance.
Correct.
But either way, they're not really spending their profits to improve their own gas lines, correct?
They're spending customer money.
And they're not only spending customer money, but then they're getting 9% of what they've put out, ergo customer money, back in their own pockets as profit, correct?
More than 9%. 9% annually like a mortgage.
Very much so. And when we pay the minimum on our credit cards, we never seem to pay that off, correct?
Correct.
So to make sure we understand here that we can talk all day long, bill is all about safety. And at the end of the day, knowing that if there are any unnecessary improvements, then we will not only pay for those improvements, we will also pay them a premium on the money that was shelled out, whether it's money that they got up front or whether it's money they fronted. So I just want to clarify that when we're talking here, what we're trying to do is save the ratepayers money.
Yes.
I believe that that's everything I've heard was making sure that any improvements are therefore necessary because they will not be borne by the utility, they will be borne by the ratepayer.
Correct.
Period.
Period.
Because they don't just get to invest and take that risk. It's not a risk, it's a guaranteed return. So this isn't really gambling for them. We just want to make sure when they're gambling with our money, from this bill I understand, that they're indeed doing it for necessary, and in this case, safety reasons.
Correct.
To stay on course. You guys are the first panel, you've been great.
Thank you.
I think we're done, we're going to move on to the next panel. Fran Schneiderman. Yep, that's it for the favorables. The favorable amendments, right. Go ahead, sir.
Thank you. Thank you, Chair Wilson and members of the committee, for the opportunity to address the bill. And thank you, Chair Wilson, for clarifying some of those issues and saying some of the things I was going to say as a follow-up. You know, I don't want to spend too much time reiterating what you've already heard. You know, I'm a consumer, a BGE customer, as in addition to being an advocate for consumers. Support this bill because I think it'll protect people going forward from further rate increases driven by the sharp rise in these distribution costs. You know, the Office of the People's Counsel report from last June documented that, you know, that was most of the reason that some of these utilities like BGE and Columbia Gas are showing huge increases in the gas costs. I have to say that as a consumer, in the cold weather, these gas increases have really started to bite for me, as I know they have for many, many others. But what I find really galling as a citizen is that it's not happening in a context where the cost of energy is way up internationally, because, you know, look at the pump. The price of gas is actually down in the last 5 years. And as the OPC report from last June demonstrates the supply costs for a lot of these utilities are going down. What's going up is the distribution costs, which have more than tripled since 2010 and are what are driving these increases. So we're paying more, not because the underlying cost of energy is rising, or even because we're converting to a more environmentally friendly form of energy that might cost more but has all kinds of other benefits, but really for these distribution costs. This bill, it has some great reforms in the system that make sure it would be focused. These kind of investments in the infrastructure are focused on things that are genuinely necessary for safety and genuinely cost effective. So I don't think the bill in any way compromises public safety or necessary investment to protect public safety. So I hope you will support the bill and give it a favorable report, and happy to answer any further questions you may have. Thank you.
No questions. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
We have Edward Hoover and Benjamin Baker.
Chair Wilson, Vice Chair Crosby, members of the Economic Matters Committee. I'm Fred Hoover. I'm the Chair of the Maryland Public Service Commission, and I'm here to testify in favor of House Bill 419 with amendments. We have had extensive discussions with the sponsor and the advocates of this particular piece of legislation, and there are a number of changes we would like to see made to it. But the upshot is that we agree, as was described by the sponsor of the bill, that there's a need to make adjustments in the existing STRIDE program. And what this bill is going to do is to make the utility companies who file the STRIDE plans before the Public Service Commission, which we then review and approve or deny as goes forward, it'll make them focus the applications they make before us more centered on the issues of safety and leak prevention, which was the original intent of the STRIDE law. Under the process that utility companies collect money from ratepayers is that they normally file what's known as a base rate case. And so all the money that they have spent providing safe, reliable service, whether it's electricity or natural gas or both, they bring that information before the Public Service Commission. We review it, decide what has been prudent, and those prudent costs are allowed to be passed on in rates. In certain situations, both the General Assembly and the Maryland Public Service Commission have created exceptions to that general rule of practice and carved out certain items and decided to provide a different mechanism in order for the company to recover the money they spend on this. That's what generated the STRIDE law. It was designed to sort of carve out specific expenses for gas companies to provide infrastructure redevelopment of their existing distribution systems. This doesn't have anything to do with generating electricity from natural gas or any other generation. This all has to do with their local distribution networks. And the law was designed for those types of investments that were related to safety and leak prevention, they would get accelerated recovery outside of the normal rate-making process. What we're saying with this particular bill is this will require the utility companies to actually focus those presentations they make before the Public Service Commission more explicitly on the items related to safety and leak prevention, and that way will lower cost going forward.
Thanks, sir.
Ben Baker, Senior Commission Advisor, just here to help answer questions. Thank you.
Questions?
So Mr. Baker was the individual who negotiated with the sponsors and the advocates of the bill, so he is more conversant in the specific amendment language that's going to be before you later on.
Chairman, and, Commissioner, thank you for being here. And, through all this, I would just perhaps just remind myself and surely get the answer from you that the Public Service Commission is eminently concerned and cares a great deal about the ratepayer safety issue. So nothing I'm hearing from anybody, advocates for the bill up to this point, would anybody argue that the Public Service Commission absolutely has the tools at their disposal to make safe our energy infrastructure. Would you agree with that?
Yes.
Okay, and so, I mean, the bill, from the folks on my side of the aisle, I guess if we want to look at it in a political sense, and I don't know that this falls necessarily politically down the line, is that we worry that when we talk about reliable, inexpensive gas being served to our consumers, then when we start reversing policies that relate to replacement of pipelines, that at some point there's going to be this lull of either diminishing returns or some degree of which you can't go back, and we will start losing gas as being a viable alternative for the consumer. I think that's the economic conversation that we're making. So let me just ask the two questions I have. That was a statement. In the fiscal note, because I go back to the fiscal note, I'm going to rely on the fiscal note unless it gets amended or corrected. It says here, subject to the PSC review and approval, the fixed annual surcharge may not exceed $2 per month for each residential natural gas customer. So David Lapp was having an exceedingly difficult time answering that question, but would you say as a commissioner that have you approved one of these, and has it actually been less than $2 per month for a residential gas customer?
Well, the $2 number is the cap, and I think there probably has been situations in individual stride cases over the years where it's probably not hit that cap. I don't, I can't tell you sitting here today the specifics of that, but.
Well, the only purpose of correcting no, go ahead, I'm sorry, you were.
I was just going to say, typically when we get a stride plan, they'll bring in their costs, they'll say, here's what we want to spend over the years. Our staff, OPC, they're going over what has been proposed and saying, here's what we think is reasonable, here's what we don't think is reasonable, and then we make a decision. As part of that, for them, because what stride is a financing mechanism. I think that's an important thing to remember is what we're talking about here. Its primary purpose is a financing mechanism. And so it's saying you are allowed to recover up to $2 that has not gone through a month that has not gone through a base rate case for its traditional prudency review. And so I would say over that 5 years, they will build up to that $2 cap. They might go over that $2 cap, but they can't get any of that money until they go and have a base rate case.
Right. So, I mean, it's important that I bring that up because Delegate Ahrens was trying to deliver that answer from the advocates, and they weren't really willing to answer the question. It's in the fiscal note, and it's not 50% increase. I mean, so that's what I need to kind of level set. The only other question, I think it sort of goes to what you were saying, is that that the stride surcharge is designed to accelerate infrastructure improvements in the state. And the legal or the term we're using here is to promptly recover reasonable and prudent costs of investment in eligible infrastructure. So when they're coming before you, they're not bringing willy-nilly any project because they're hoping to make money off of it. I think they're probably having to demonstrate to you that we have aging and or potentially dangerous infrastructure that needs replacement, but they've got to get your, I mean, the commission has to agree with that. I mean, I would assume that this is not just a new bill that's going to help you do a better job. I think what the bill probably does if it gets passed unamended is it might give you additional constraints as to whether or not you can say no to a project.
No, I don't think it will. I mean,
no, the other way around, to say yes to a project.
So what this bill is aiming to do is to try to make the companies, when they make those stride applications, those stride plans that Mr. Baker just talked about, have them more focused on the specific investments that are needed to meet the safety requirements and the leak prevention requirements. Because the problem is with the current system is that they sort of put the cost in front of us with these plans up to the amount of the cap, and then there's a later process that basically tries to claw back some of the money that's been front-forwarded with them. And so instead of, so this is going to be making sure that the initial plan is closer, and I guess more accurate might be the best way to term it, as to meeting the demands for this specific carve-out that was decided by the General Assembly. Because the normal amount of money that they spend on upgrading their system, this comment about replacing the old the pipes in the system, they're doing that all the time. They do that for a variety of reasons to provide service, but this thing was aimed only at those investments that they needed to make sure that the system was in fact safe, and hopefully the system didn't leak gas, because that's an environmental problem too. And so we're trying to make sure that it does what it's supposed to do, and it only does what it's supposed to do.
Well, I respect what you do, and Chairman, thanks for the time. I'll just say, I know you're coming in with amendments, and hopefully those amendments sort of get to the concerns that I think all of us as a committee would have, and I surely think you would have those same concerns, which is consumer safety, which is why STRIDE exists. So thank you for it. Sure.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So if I understand it correctly, if you recover money under the STRIDE surcharge, it doesn't go into rate base, correct?
Eventually it will, or it has the potential to eventually go into rate base.
So they're double dipping?
Not so. That's fair. It's not a double dip in that sense. It's traditionally without the STRIDE surcharge, what would be happening is the utility would be making investments, but those investments would not actually be inside of rates there because they haven't gone through a review process yet. So what STRIDE does is basically allows, it's supposed to better align once the money has been spent with cost recovery. So it would reduce what you might have heard before as regulatory lag between once the investment was made and when the utility started to get their cost recovery.
So what happens to that investment while it's waiting on this regulatory lag?
Under a traditional case or under?
Is it just sitting there? If I invest $1 million, I only recover $1 million, or do I recover more than $1 million because, it went 5 years before I ended up getting recovery? How much do I get back?
Until it is moved in, well, outside of STRIDE, an investment outside of STRIDE, until they show up for a rate case, they're not getting any opportunity to return on that investment or get that money back.
So there's no return on the investment, and they're not getting recovery because they haven't had a rate base?
Correct. And so STRIDE.
So there is a risk there?
Yes.
Yeah.
And that's, I think, why I was making.
There's a risk that they're not going to get their money back.
There's always a risk the utility isn't going to get their money back. I think that is part of the regulatory paradigm that the utilities have. In fact, under STRIDE, they're going to show up and say, we'll say generally these look like okay investments, but prudency is still not guaranteed until they show up for a rate case and demonstrate the investments they made were just and reasonable.
And do you guys always approve 100% of what a utility comes in and asks for in rate base?
No.
No. So there's a risk there too that they're not going to get full recovery.
But part of that is because the compact between a regulated monopoly, so they're the only guy that can provide this particular service. They don't have any other competitors. And so the trade-off is that the government oversees the amount of recovery they get in their expenses, so they're only allowed to recover the money they spend that was prudently spent to provide safe, reliable service to the customers, along with an opportunity to earn a return that would be comparable to what it would be if they were a competitive company. So that's the deal they make. That's the price.
So they're
of being
potentially going to get a
utility.
return on that rate base investment, whereas if it was recovered under STRIDE, there's no return component and there's no rate base component. They got the money up front. So I'm just struggling with the title of this bill. It says it's the Ratepayer Protection Act. So how does this bill minimize the cost to the ratepayer? I'm assuming the utility, and you're not going to approve a cost recovery if you think that utility just spent that money freely just to make a return. I would hope not, or I would think the PSC is not doing their job. So how is this bill save the ratepayer money? If the PSC is currently reviewing all of these costs, you're approving them up front, how does this bill, and it talks about energy policy, the state's energy policy and all that, which I think is misguided. It shouldn't be in this bill. I get it that you should direct them to look at repairs versus full replacement, that sort of thing. Obviously, we want to keep the costs as low as possible, as well as maintaining the safety of the resident. So how is this bill protect the ratepayer and reduce their cost?
Right. So the trade-off is this. In the traditional way that they collect money, when they file a rate case, we look at the expenses they've incurred in order to provide service. And so as they've mentioned, this gives them a delay in when they get their money and some question as to whether or not they're going to get all the money that they think they're owed. Under this mechanism, that goes away. They get their money under the cap, but they get the money forwarded specifically devoted to this particular.
That's the program itself, but I still, the question remains, how does the bill as amended, it's in front of us, how does it save ratepayer?
So what it will do is it will narrow the focus of and make the utilities essentially sharpen their pencils on what they put in these stride plans to make sure that, in fact, all the investments that they're proposing to be collected through this stride mechanism are, in fact, only dedicated to safety and leak prevention.
So if it's outside of the stride program, the utility can still choose to replace that gas line.
Absolutely.
And it's up to you to determine whether or not that is a viable recovery.
And they would do that in the context of a normal rate case.
Aren't they going to do, right, so aren't they going to do that anyhow? So again, it goes back to the question. Well, I'm not seeing how this is saving.
I think probably the way to put it is Stride basically puts a green light up for certain investments and says, you have an opportunity to get better financials around these kinds of projects, go for it. And so what I would say the amendments that we've worked with the sponsor on is trying to strengthen around that what we would say yes to when they choose to go for those green light projects that they're going to get quicker cost recovery on. So therefore so in terms of the ratepayer protection, what you're doing with this bill, if you pass it, is trying to put different restrictions and possibly tighter restrictions on what they would pursue in terms of those green lighted projects.
So they may get quicker cost recovery.
Correct.
Right.
But the other investment's still going into rate base, which they get a return plus a recovery of their costs.
Right, if they choose to do it.
Traditional method.
So I don't, again, I don't see what it's saying is, but, thank you.
Fred, you were talking about the rate case, but Stride, they get their money up front, right?
Yes.
All right, so again, when we talk about this risk, I want to make sure we're clear. We're not talking about the general rate case, because here they get their money up front.
Right.
And then, okay. I just
later on, it gets reconciled through the rating process.
Correct. And just for clarification, so let's say in the BGE area, who owns those gas pipes?
BG&E does.
They own, so that's their property, correct? Mm-hmm. So if we took Stride away and something was to happen because of their property, because they either there's a crack, that would be their legal risk that they would take, correct?
Yes.
So, because it sounds like, again, the way Stride was laid out was, although we're basically paying them to upgrade their own property. And in this case, we're trying to avoid any kind of catastrophic loss as well. But this is these businesses are getting paid upfront, guaranteed money, to upgrade their own wares. And therefore, I would hope avoid any problems or liability. That's the way I understand it.
That was the theory behind the original.
There we go. Yeah. Thank you, sir. Delegate Charkoudian.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I just want to, there does seem to be a lot of confusion about what the bill does, and I think it's significant that you're here supporting the bill, because as I understand it, the legislature gives you direction, and you take that direction and you implement it. And the legislature a number of years back said, we support Stride for safety reasons, and now you in the commissioner role are looking at the proposals that come to you, and you have to follow the law as we give it to you. So we've said it's about safety, but what you seem to be telling us now is that without tightening up this and clarifying, no, for real it's about safety and here's some of the guidelines, you're in a position where maybe you would have to approve of some things that don't fit squarely in that safety place unless we tighten up the law. Is that right?
That's our view as to why this change needs to be made.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Just, I guess I want to come back, a couple things. One, does any other state do this?
Yes.
Okay. Any of the surrounding states? I'm just trying to.
I would have to look. I mean, this is a very common approach in the gas industry. You will find this in a lot of states. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Is there justification requirements similar to what is being proposed in any of the other states?
I would need to check for you. I don't know.
Okay.
Sorry.
And then can you just provide, because I believe your amendment, some of your amendment, I know that there's multiple parts to it, deals with the notification process.
Yes.
Okay. And then can you just clarify what that notification process would look like under the amendment?
Right. So what we're asking for is, the bill says 2 years. We're asking for that to be basically commission determined. We've already done this with now 2 utilities where we, I think, set it at 6 months. Basically, we have the flexibility to put what we believe should be in that notification. It does still retain the statement that if you want to electrify, you can, but it doesn't the amendments that we've discussed don't go any further than that. But basically, it allows us to do the notifications that we're already requiring under the STRIDE, under these programs. So basically, we're telling customers, work's going to be done here, so you are aware. If you want to pursue electrification, you can. Your call. Go forth and prosper.
Okay. And then under that language, I just want to make sure it's not, there wouldn't be the ability or it wouldn't be the intent of the PSC to provide a different notification standard for different utilities, would it? Or would just you come up with whatever that reasonable standard is?
Well, I mean,
go ahead, sorry.
Occasionally we get pitched different ideas by different utilities for their own purposes, but the rule of thumb is we would rather have these types of policies be uniform and across the board. So I would think without a fairly good reason, we would not have different notification policies for different companies, so.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Good to see you again. But question for you, a couple of weeks ago, we had a conversation, we were talking about gas in the state. Are we going to be moving forward with that? And as you read through the bill, and I'm on page 5, I think, I'm reading that this bill does talk, it says it's, the bill is required to improve the safety of the gas system after consideration of alternative replacements. What does that mean? Do you know?
The alternative fuels clause that they had, that was in there?
Okay.
Yeah, we asked them to remove that.
That's fine.
One. Okay.
Oh, you did? Okay. The next line says it's consistent with the need to reduce the use of natural gas in light of the state climate policy. If you were a gas company, how would you interpret that? Trying to do business in Maryland.
Well, I think that, I think the gas industry in general understands that there's concerns about the emission situations when it comes to use of natural gas. I mean, natural gas has always been described as this bridge fuel to get us away from the fossil fuels that caused severe environmental problems, i.e. coal, to, more different technologies that are emission-free, whether they're renewables or nuclear power or whatever.
The same thing, though?
And so the natural gas industry itself, I think, understands that at some point there's going to be some transition for a variety of reasons. I mean, the reason why we generate electricity, from natural gas instead of coal has a lot to do with the economics of natural gas because of fracking. Now, at some point, those economics are going to change for a variety of reasons, and they're going to move to something else.
I understand you, but I asked a question about if you were the natural gas company, would you be looking at Maryland and say, gee, I want to go there and invest on something that in law says our policies are to get rid of you? You wouldn't. And I'm saying you see these things.
Well, again, I mean, they're going to be coming up here later on, so I suppose you can ask them, but.
They are going to be coming up here, but with all due respect,
but there's
solar's the same thing.
There is nothing in the current law that outlaws the use of natural gas, and we've done nothing at the Public Service Commission to tell them that they can't.
The state climate policy is what I'm talking about. Our state's policy is that we're going to look for alternatives.
With all due respect, I mean, I don't make that policy, you do.
Well, I see it differently.
I can wait.
No.
Oh, wait. You sure? Just for the record here, I mean, look, just so we don't all sound like we're anti this or anti that, but I'm just reading, all right? So you just made a comment. I'm not seeing anything to outlaw this, but this bill would codify getting rid of natural gas. It adds another category to the STRIDE program, which is to get rid of existing pipelines. Instead of repairing them, replacing them, just get rid of them for electrification. So that's the concern, is that this bill, in black and white, says that that would be the new attempt with this program, is to replace gas lines with electrification. And by the way, none of this addresses all those other issues we've been dealing with in our state, you know, about like our future goals of over-electrification, relying on solar and wind and all these things that are not coming online. So that's the concern that we keep bringing up. And you guys can dance around it all you want, but it's written here in black and white. It literally says to targeted retirement or abandonment of portions of the gas system in conjunction with electrification, and then further down at climate solutions and all that other stuff. So, I mean, that's what we're dealing with here,
Right,
respectfully.
and what, I think what the intent of that language is to say, when you're making, when the companies are coming through to make the changes in the local distribution gas network in order to deal with safety and leak prevention, the customers are then told, you now can make a decision whether you want to stay on gas or whether you want to move to something else. Now, again, it's been the policy of this legislature to increase electrification of the economy and the society. And so what this is designed to do is to have the customer essentially make that decision. Do I want to stay with what I got, or do I want to go in this other direction? And what we're trying to say is, if the customer is going to move in this different direction, then the gas company shouldn't spend a lot of money running pipes to their house that aren't going to be used anymore.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Okay. I think we're done with that part of the hearing. We have to move on to the presentation. We have Chris Klein, Carl Collins, Brittany Jones, Cynthia Foreman, Brandon Todd.
I have Mark Case with me with BGE. He's signed up. We'll have to go together because I'm just introducing him for the testimony. Do you want us to sit back?
No, I'll just please put your names called, guys. In this case, that's fine.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Chair.
Gentlemen on the end, sir? Yes. I have to ask you,
Carvel Collins with Columbia Gas.
of course. I'll have to ask you to step back. I'll call you in a second round because we don't have the microphones the way that the machines work. I think you're apologize.
Understood.
Go ahead. Please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Again, apologies for that. My name's Brittany Jones. I'm with BGE, and I have Mr. Mark Case here with me, who is not a registered lobbyist, but here at my request.
Good afternoon, Mr. Chairman and members of the committee. BGE respectfully opposes House Bill 419 for several important reasons. First, the bill is set up to make it very difficult for utilities to do the necessary work to maintain a safe and reliable gas system. We already perform risk-based analyses and prioritization of work in a transparent fashion before the PSC. We operate a leak detection and repair program where that is the appropriate solution. Second, we offer customers today the opportunity to electrify in advance of system work. To date, of the 13,000 customers provided the opportunity to electrify, only 2 BGE customers have opted to move off gas. Adding a 2-year delay before that gas safety work can be performed is not constructive. Third, Maryland lags most other states significantly in its pipeline work. Those states around us, on average, do 50% more work each year. Our replacement rate is the lowest of the top 10 comparable states. Putting more barriers to doing this essential work will not help. Fourth, the STRIDE program is working. We're down to the last 10% of our system that needs attention. We've seen the number of hazardous leaks cut by more than half. Our leak rate drops by 100 to 1 factor after we replace a pipe segment. It's making a real difference. Finally, I will note that gas remains a lower cost source of energy for our customers, even with the STRIDE work. It is typically 30 to 50% lower cost for our customers relative to electric, propane, or oil. And I'll also note that the average residential gas bill today for BGE is the same in 2024 as it was in 2008. Gas remains our most affordable choice. Today is not the right time to eliminate our focus on the safety of the gas systems, and I urge an unfavorable report. Thank you.
Good afternoon, Chair and Vice Chair. My name is Brandon Todd, and I lead Government Affairs Policy and Advocacy for Washington Gas. And today, Washington Gas respectfully submits this statement in opposition to House Bill 419. Washington Gas has also submitted written testimony for the committee record. I'm the registered lobbyist for Washington Gas, and today we have 2 subject matter experts who will provide oral testimony and be prepared to answer questions. At my request today is Ms. Cynthia Quarterman, who served as the administrator of the U.S. Department of Transportation's Pipeline and Hazardous Materials Safety Administration, or PHMSA, and spearheaded the U.S. DOT's call to action in 2011, which encouraged states to accelerate removal of high-risk materials from natural gas systems. During her tenure, PHMSA testified in favor of accelerated pipeline replacement programs across the country, including in Maryland. For the purpose of her testimony is to remind the committee of what led to this critical safety initiative and to encourage the continued support of STRIDE here in Maryland. Also present at my request, but not at the table at the moment, is Mr. Kevin Murphy, who serves as Vice President of Engineering, Asset Management, and Gas Supply Operations for Washington Gas. Thank you.
Good afternoon, Mr. Chairman, delegates. It's a pleasure to be here today. I personally witnessed the devastation caused by several low-probability, high-consequence pipeline incidents that destroyed communities and caused catastrophic injuries and deaths. In fact, so many occurred within a few months, the DOT and PHMSA led a nationwide call to action. National data indicated that certain pipeline materials prior to the 1970s were well beyond their forecasted lifespan. Distribution lines were especially targeted because of their proximity to homes, businesses, and communities. Since 2011, remarkable advancements have been achieved with the removal of more than 50% of cast iron mains and services and 44% of bare steel mains and 51% of services nationwide. 24 states and 1 territory have completely eliminated cast iron from their systems. Maryland has removed 33% of cast iron mains and more than 70% of bare steel mains and 47% of its services. This legislature should be proud of those safety achievements, but it must not stay the course to catch up to other states. PHMSA requires a proactive, replacement-focused approach to this ancient pipe. Repair is not sufficient or appropriate, and it can even increase the risk of an incident. Maryland should do everything it can do to remove vintage materials faster. I urge this committee to support the STRIDE Act and not back away from continually accelerated removal of high-risk natural gas as Maryland advances its climate goals. It's of the utmost importance that all pipes be operationally safe and reliable when customers require service. Thank you.
Chair Wilson, Vice Chair Crosby, members of the committee, thank you for the opportunity to testify today before you in opposition to House Bill 419. My name is Christopher Klein. I work at Miller Pipeline, as does my son. I'm a proud member of Operating Engineers Local 37, and I'm joined today by my colleague, Frank Brock, Vice President of our East Region. I'd like to tell you how important the work we do is for myself, my family, my union, and our community. Working in the natural gas industry has given me financial stability and a sense of community. We are a diverse workforce. Miller Pipeline has over 130 employees in Maryland, representing 20 different unions, doing approximately $30 million in work across our state. Our workforce in Baltimore is 70% Black and Hispanic. In 2023, we had nearly $10 million in total diverse spending with Baltimore Gas and Electric. We are a company that lives our values and offers a chance for families of all backgrounds to achieve the American dream. But now, workers like myself are worried about losing Stride, and not just because of the important safety measures it provides for the communities we live in, but also because limiting Stride will end our ability to make a living and provide for our families. Workers in our unions have fought hard to make this the sort of career you can build a family on. Experienced crew members at Miller Pipeline can earn $65,000 to $100,000 a year, depending on their position, plus benefits. Our Without people willing to get in the trenches, I don't see how even so-called targeted repair work will be completed. I'll close by thanking you and hoping you consider the men and women like myself who take pride waking up at 4 a.m. doing the work to keep the people safe and providing for our families. I ask that for an unfavorable vote on this legislation. Thank you.
Thank you. I guess I'll ask my first question to Mr. Case. Right now, you do own your pipes, right?
Yes, we
And
do.
so prior to Stride, weren't you still responsible for the safety of the pipes that you owned?
Yes, we were.
So what stops you from, you said it makes it harder to replace these pipes, but you can do that anyway. These are your pipes. You can do that at your own leisure, or you can do it through a rate proceeding, correct?
The bill will introduce several new barriers to be able to go forward.
If you want to go through and get the money up front. But like the equipment I own for my business, I usually pay to fix that. And I understand, you know, I'll pay it, I'll spread it to my clients, of course. But I'll go back to, and everybody listening, there's nothing stopping anybody who owns a pipe from fixing that pipe. I would in fact hope, because of, as a lawyer, that you would, that would be an interest to make sure that the equipment that you're using is safe, that's not going to, you know, cause any injury to anyone. So I guess I don't understand, because there are many states that don't have Stride, and I would proffer to say that those companies are still responsible for the safety of all the pipes and the upkeep. Would you agree?
Yes, I would. I would say, though, that the bill does introduce several reasons why a utility might not be able to replace a segment of pipe, even if it knew it was the right thing to do.
Why is that?
The bill establishes new requirements that have to be demonstrated as part of a PSC proceeding. And ultimately, if the commission finds that with the tighter requirements and additional standards and 2 years advance notice and risk-adjusted portfolio, which we already do today, repair versus replace analysis, they decide, no, we're not going to allow you to replace that pipe, it hamstrings us.
Again, but you could go out today and replace that pipe, correct? Because that is your pipe, and you could replace any of the equipment you choose to, and there's nothing in this bill that stops you from changing out, addressing any of the needs that you have with any of the equipment in your company. That's a fair statement, correct?
I see it differently. And the reason I see it differently is that we're not in the habit of disregarding the instructions from the Public Service Commission. So we're going to go in with the proposal that we think does the best job for our customers, considering cost, considering safety, considering climate, all those things. We're going to go in with the plan that we believe in. But if the commission says, no BGE, you may not replace 42 miles of pipe, which is what we've been averaging in the last several years, you can do 10 miles per year of pipe going forward. We're going to abide by that.
Sure, but if they say, the way I heard it is, no BGE, we're not going to pay you up front to replace 43 miles of pipe. We're going to pay you up front to do 10 miles of pipe, meaning you can still do the rest by yourself. If you find it important, I want to make sure it's very clear for the people working here and for the folks that do this for a living, that there's nothing stopping you from maintaining your equipment. Stride is a means to assist you in maintaining your equipment. But as many states that don't have it, if the PSC tells you, no, we don't think that that's standard, under our standard, or under this standard, that disqualifies, there is nothing stopping you from leaning on your own expertise, using your own people to go out and nonetheless replace that pipe.
Yeah, I just don't know that that's true.
What's stopping you? How about that?
If we have a commission order that authorizes BGE to go out and replace 10 miles per year pipe instead of the 40 miles of pipe that we have been proposing, then we're going to abide by that. Now, we'll always try to choose the best segments, but even that, we have to show the commission and parties which segments we're recommending, why, what were the 12 risk factors that led to us choosing those segments of pipe. But if they say, we're tossing out 3/4 of your program, you're authorized to do 1/4, we have to abide by that to some degree.
To be clear, so you can't choose to do anything that they don't give you permission to do? Or is it the financing side? I just want to know. Because it sounds like you're saying that you can't you can't maintain what you own.
Yeah, this isn't the financing issue for BGE. BGE is unusual relative to the other gas utilities in the state. We are no longer using a separate Stride financing mechanism. We no longer have a surcharge on our bill. We have rolled our Stride work into our multi-year rate plans that BGE has started in 2021. So that is how we're currently recovering Stride. There's not like a special recovery mechanism for Stride any longer for BGE.
These are choices that you are making as a company. Just like your choice to say, well, if they won't allow me to do this, what they don't consider safety issues, that's still a choice, because I will be clear, nothing in this bill stops you from doing that.
Yeah,
it's a choice
BGE
that
could
you would
choose to do the work and just not get any recovery of it, if that makes sense.
Sure. Okay.
Mr. Chairman, may I clarify something?
Not yet.
Okay.
And I guess the question is, the 2-year notice, I understand the hesitation there, but I'm just looking at the standards saying that the gas company selected, looking at what you have selected and given priority to your projects, and they analyze it and compare the cost of proposed replacement projects with alternatives to replacement, including leak detection, targeted, meaning that if you put in a pipe last year, by the current definition, you can go and say, you know what, I need to replace that pipe. You can just go do it. And then you can, but this is just saying, no, before you do that, we want to make sure that there's something else that can't be done that may be cheaper. Somebody would explain to me how that's a bad thing.
Yeah, Washington Gas had a really good analogy in their testimony, and I'm going to leverage that. Let's talk about a tire on your car. If it's a new tire, it gets a nail in it, what are you likely to do? You're not likely to replace the tire. If it can be patched, you're likely to do that. Maybe that's a $75 repair instead of a $300 new tire.
Right.
Suppose that tire has 7 bald patches on it, and one of those bald patches starts to leak air. You could take it to the same dealer and have that bald spot patched up for $75, cheaper than the $300. But the point is, these are not apples to apples comparisons. It's apples to oranges. One is a safety measure. If you put the new tire on there knowing you've got bad patches all over the place, which is analogous to some of our older gas system. It's not the majority of our system, but we're replacing pipes from the 1860s, from the 1900s. These are not, 5-year-old pipes that we're saying, let's go in and replace them. When we replace the pipe with modern materials, the leak rate goes down by 100-to-1 ratio. So that pipe is good for a long time. We're talking about the 10% of our system that's the oldest, the most outdated materials. That's where we're trying to go in there. And to have to demonstrate that the $300 investment in the new tire is better than doing the $75 patch job, when one can see the risks that are associated with this. PHMSA had great testimony, and some of the, I hope you all take a chance to read that, but it talks about the fact that for this old vintage pipe, repair is not a smart solution. It is not de-risking the situation. It is the worst decision you could make.
And I agree. I think the PSC would also agree with you, so I don't really understand that risk. But my analogy is this. If I have a car and every time something small goes wrong with be it a pebble in my tire or a nail, and I know that I can get a brand new tire and I don't have to pay nothing, I'm getting a new tire. if I know not only will I get a brand new tire, but I'll get paid for the time that I took to time off to replace that tire, maybe with some interest, so I'll actually make money every time I see a problem, I have a slow leak, for some reason it's low today, I will replace that tire because that will be financially beneficial to me, which is, I believe, what they were talking about. And this, I'm saying that's my analogy to you. What our concerns was how many times you replace this tire, even though it might just have needed a patch, or it may just be a slow leak. I believe that's the concern with the bill. And again, I guess we'll agree to disagree on how it shows, but I don't believe that your hands are tied. I believe you're making a choice. I believe the PSC is also going to be interested in safety, and I believe that the demonstration of these pipes from 1860, I'm sure that they would agree with that. Maybe wrong, and I guess that's where we'll get to. I do know we have some questions that I want to bogart all the time. Delegate Charkoudian.
Can I first clarify to the woman on this end, do you work for PHMSA right now?
I do not.
Who do you represent right now?
I am here on behalf of Washington Gas.
Okay, I just want to make sure we're clear about that. I appreciate the history with PHMSA, but I just want to, because there was a little confusion about references to PHMSA. So my question is this, I think, Mark, you might be the best person to answer. I want to build on what the chairman said first. Is it accurate that STRIDE is separate when you come in for a STRIDE proceeding? Now, you said you've combined them, but the STRIDE decision-making, the guidance to the PSC on STRIDE is different from the guidance to the PSC on a general rate-making. Is that correct?
I would say we've moved into a bit of a hybrid world.
Okay,
where
but
rate-making
in terms
has
of the
changed. And when we bring STRIDE into a multi-year plan, which has electric investments, gas investments, all sort of system investments, we're providing additional information as if it was a standalone proceeding before the commission. So we're providing more project detail to follow the requirements of the STRIDE law from 2013, even though we're not using STRIDE as a recovery mechanism, we're wrapping in to our overall multi-year rate plan.
Okay, so let me not ask about how BG&E uses it, but let me ask about the statute. Would you agree that there's two different statutes in terms of the direction that the state gives to the Public Service Commission? There's one that's about just and reasonable rates in general, and that affects gas pipelines and meters and poles and wires and all the rest of it. And then there's STRIDE, and that's a different set of guidance that we provide to the Public Service Commission. Would you agree with that?
Not in the context if you're suggesting that all the other dimensions that apply to other work, the prudency of that work, that if you're suggesting that those standards don't apply to STRIDE work, I would disagree.
No, I'm suggesting the flip of it. I'm reading the STRIDE statute, and it clearly says this is for things that are separate from a standard rate case. And so what I'm saying is, to the chairman's point, if we got rid of STRIDE altogether, if we tightened up STRIDE, if we said anything replaced under STRIDE has to be a pink pipe, any of those things would not change what you can do in a standard rate case. Is that right? If you could
I don't know if I followed that question.
If we change the STRIDE rules, we have not changed the standard rate-making rules. That's a different part of statute. Would you agree with that?
Yes.
So if we tighten up STRIDE rules to say there's this extra way you have to show that it for real is about safety, which is what we're doing here.
And we think we've been doing that all along. This
is where, yeah, this is where,
any sense to me.
And this is where I don't understand the opposition. So you don't like the two-year wait period, fine, we can put that aside. But what I have consistently not understood about the gas company's opposition to actually putting front and center safety into the statute, I think this gets to Delegate Adams' question. The reason that we can't tell for sure if this will matter is because you're showing up and saying it's already about safety, and we're going, okay, that's great. So you won't mind if we put that in the law like this and tighten it up a bit. And you're saying, no, if you put that in the law, then we can't do what we're doing. So apparently it wasn't about safety.
Well, are you really trying to make it about safety, or are you really trying to put in more barriers that can make it more difficult to do the work?
I think what we're trying to do, in a rate-making process that already has an imbalance in information in terms of the multiple attorneys and everyone else who can come in for BG&E compared to what the state can afford. So you already have an information asymmetry in that. we're trying to put a little more burden on the multiple attorneys that BG&E can bring into the table to say, no, you show us just a little more so we're sure it's about safety. And if what you've been saying all along, that it's about safety, is true, then yeah, it's a little more burden to really show that for real it is. I think potentially, if you're worried that your projects aren't going to get through with a higher burden to really show that it's about safety, then maybe we have reason to believe that it hasn't been. But the reason the fiscal note writer isn't able to tell us for sure what the cost difference is going to be is because if it has been about safety all along, then you'll continue to get these approved. And if it hasn't been, then there'll be fewer that are approved. And that's where we'll save the money.
I actually read it differently. I read that we're supplanting safety as the chief goal with a cost-benefit analysis that says, show me that it's cheaper to have replaced that pipe than it would be to continue to do patches for the next 20 years. That's what I read into the bill. If that's a misread, so be it. But that to me seems what it's about. I cited to you that Maryland has a rate that's, the other states that do the same work that we do, top 10 states, we're the lowest of the top 10 states by 50%. And now we're recommending to put new barriers into the approval process that will make it even more difficult to do the work. It's universal best practice for cast iron pipe that's 100 years old to replace that pipe, not to patch it.
And I think that this analysis that you would provide, that we haven't asked to have been provided before, would demonstrate that. Like if that is universal best practice, I trust the Public Service Commission that when we tighten up and say for real about safety and make them show you why, and that they've considered alternatives, if that is universal best practice, I suspect that you'll be able to replace it.
I don't share your confidence. And the reason is that I think parties that don't want the STRIDE work to happen to start with, and there are parties that have argued against STRIDE from the very beginning. When we go in for STRIDE plans, they continue to argue against those STRIDE plans. I believe those parties will utilize this new language to make it more and more difficult for the utilities to do it. They'll say, you could continue to patch it each time instead of doing the replacement, but you're not comparing two equal things. One solves for the risk, one leaves a catastrophic risk.
Those parties can continue to argue, and we, as a General Assembly, have given clearer direction, and the Public Service Commission here just said they want the direction that doubles down on this is the most cost-effective way to meet safety if we're using the STRIDE plan. But to the, hang on. To the chairman's point, you can still do anything you want in the rate case. This doesn't change what happens for you in a standard rate case. This only changes what happens for you in terms of STRIDE.
In a practical
Mr. Chair,
sense,
I'm
it's
good.
unrealistic to suggest that.
Chairman. So the fiscal note again, and I'm going back to it because it's instructed to remind me what STRIDE's all about, but I'm hearing the two prior comments on this. The bill summary says that the legislative intent from the General Assembly is that the purpose of STRIDE surcharge process is to, with italics, promote gas infrastructure improvements in the state, and then again, when necessary and appropriate, to ensure safety of the gas system. So to somebody's point, I don't know if it was brought up here or somebody else, if the legislature decides that we're no longer interested in promoting gas infrastructure for the purpose of safety, I assume we can amend STRIDE like we're trying to do today, or we can get rid of it completely, but we're making a legislative decision. Would you agree with that?
I would agree with that.
Okay.
I think we in the Public Service Commission pay very close attention to what the legislature is recommending.
And I have demonstrated a tremendous amount of respect to our Commissioner Hoover when I've said that his responsibility and that commission's responsibility is to citizen safety. And when we start passing legislation, it's not lost on me that they came up support with amendment. Now, I've got to listen to their amendments, and I assume we'll have some dialogue as a legislature as to whether or not we want to get rid of STRIDE or significantly amend it. But at the end of the day, if you're listening to folks like us talk about how you are currently heavily regulated and we're not interested in promoting safety, I imagine that's why you're saying what you're saying without having to be totally obtuse about it, is that we're concerned about this policy, and here's why.
I sat at this table in 2013 in support of the STRIDE bill because we believed, and we had PHMSA support at that time, saying Maryland is so far behind the rest of the country in doing its critical safety work. That's why in my view, the General Assembly approved STRIDE. We knew it wasn't 10 years and we're done kind of thing in 2013. We've still got work ahead of us. It's good work. It's making a difference. Gas remains affordable. We're doing it in a balance of all those things taken together. And so, to me, an effort by the General Assembly to put more obstacles and barriers, and that is clearly the view of the gas utilities, that this is an effort to gut the STRIDE program. I firmly believe that. And I don't think that's in the best interest of our customers.
So in the fiscal note, the fiscal writer has information sources as Public Service Commission, Office of People's Counsel, Maryland Department of the Environment, and the Department of Legislative Services. Nowhere in the information source am I hearing that we've gone to either you or advocates for the gas industry. So when I started off by saying that this project or this bill can theoretically cost us projects that are mission critical, and I'm looking for the right place in the fiscal note, I believe that's because they really didn't ask the entities that actually analyze and decide whether or not a project needs to move forward for repair and or replacement. But if they did ask you, my guess is the fiscal note writer may not have been so unwilling to say, okay, here it is. It's unknown whether there will be projects that will not be approved under the bill. So let me rephrase my question. Let me get it right. If a fiscal note writer doesn't ask industry what the impact of this bill is, I'm asking you now, are you concerned and are you willing to answer the fiscal note writer's ambiguity here when it says it's unknown which projects would not be approved under the bill? Is that a concern?
Delegate Adams, thanks so much for pointing that out. I think you're alluding to something that's really important, and it's this notion that we're doing this type of reckless spend or looking for opportunities to monetize these projects. The way the STRIDE law is written and the way that the commission has governed this program, there's a limit of how many miles we can replace per year. So currently, BGE can only replace up to 42 miles per year. What that does is already forces us to tighten up our reporting, to look at risk analysis. We can show you guys the level of reporting to show that we have to identify the oldest infrastructure, the most leak-prone infrastructure, and that's what we're talking about replacing. It's specifically cast iron and bare steel main, very specific. If we've done a replacement in the past few years, that's going to be PVC piping. That's way more durable. We're not looking to replace that. So we're talking up to 42 miles per year, and then a monthly surcharge that's capped at $2. So I think that this existing STRIDE already has enough guardrails in place.
All right, thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I want to ask you the same question I asked the other panel. This bill is titled the Ratepayer Protection Act. So how does the passage of this bill reduce rates for the customers?
I don't think it is ratepayer protection. I think it exposes ratepayers to a higher level of risk. I suppose if one took the view that this is a bill that will limit the amount of work that a utility can accomplish, so it will spend less to improve its system from a safety standpoint, that customers would appreciate that and be better off financially for not having to pay for that work. None of the work that we do is just work that BGE or Washington or Columbia, any of us just dreaming up on our own. We go through a highly regulated process. It's a 10-month process for a utility like BGE. Opponents or stakeholders get to bring in their own witnesses. They get to challenge the work we do. They get to challenge the projects we do. They get to challenge, is there a safety benefit of the work? Every element of the work we do is subject to that scrutiny and a regulatory proceeding. So by putting in new requirements that take a state like Maryland that's already significantly lagging the rest of the industry and putting in new requirements to make it more difficult to be able to get that work approved, I don't see how that's protecting ratepayers.
Okay. Washington Gas, you guys have an opinion on that?
Well, I cannot speak to the ratepayer piece other than I'm really here to talk about safety, and the chairman said I had an opportunity to let you guys know that Maryland is not the only state that has a STRIDE-like law. In fact, 41 states, the vast majority, and one of the territories have laws like STRIDE, and that when I was head of PHMSA, one of my staff came to this legislature and testified on the behalf of the federal government to ask that they do enact STRIDE. And the reason for that is that because the way rates work for utilities, it's such that we wanted to make sure that this work happened immediately. I mean, there were states around the country that had a 100-year replacement program for their cast iron pipe and bare steel. I mean, Maryland was one that had, some companies had no dates determined, and we wanted to make sure to get those things out of the ground immediately. I think when we look at our ratepayers, we have to also think about the safety of the facilities that are there. That's a ratepayer protection as well. And it has to be, when you come to pipeline safety, it has to be top of mind. We specifically went to talk to NARUC, which is the National Association of Regulatory Utility Commissioners, and said to them, please help us by putting in place things like STRIDE in order to make sure that these pipelines get removed as soon as physically possible. We're a decade in, and I am proud to say that thanks to that work, 50% of those pipelines have been removed around the country. And it's not time for us to stop and turn back now. We owe the ratepayers a responsibility to get the remaining old pipes out of the ground as soon as possible. If we push off and change STRIDE in a way that it's going to handicap or put hurdles in place to make that happen, then the folks around this table, the people at the commission, I wouldn't want them to suffer some of the consequences that I had having to see and go visit incident sites because of some of this old pipe that had not been replaced.
So you said STRIDE is in 41 states?
There is a version of STRIDE in 41 states and 1 territory.
All right, so should STRIDE be about safety, or should it be about the state climate's policy, or both?
Well, I'm a safety advocate, so for me, safety is top priority, but you should know when you repair or replace a pipe, climate is affected in a very positive way, and I think you've probably seen that here in Maryland as they've seen around the country. When you replace old pipe, which are the leading leakers on the system, of course, natural gas leaks go down, the climate improves.
Okay, thank you.
That's all the questions. Thank you guys very much. Our next panel,
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Maryland's energy grid is in crisis, and in recognition of that, terrible with the mic. I apologize. Good afternoon. Maryland's energy grid is in crisis, and in recognition of that fact, bills were introduced earlier this week that may work to resolve that crisis. But for now, an all of the above solution is what is necessary to assure all of our energy systems, including the state's natural gas infrastructure, is safe and reliable. The state's energy ecosystem depends on its natural gas network, as does each of our 500,000 customers. And this has been true for decades. It's true today, and it'll be true for decades to come. The one thing we all have in common, our customers, our employees, and each of us in this room, I expect, is the fundamental expectation that the natural gas system must be safe. It's our highest value at Washington Gas. The revisions to the STRIDE statute proposed in House Bill 419 will not save money for the consumers. What they will do is hinder our capacity to perform necessary proactive system replacements that are required to maintain the safety and reliability of the network. The proposal seeks to shift that focus from the proven benefits of proactive replacements to leak repair and electrification as alternatives. Leak detection and repair cannot solely be relied upon to ensure safety, and it is already a part of the utility safety programs. Adding the provision to House Bill 419 does not improve safety or lower costs. It's a redundancy. With regard to the proposal to set electrification alternatives, industry experience shows that these are not effective at reducing the need for pipe replacement, nor are they cost-effective or popular with the impacted consumers. They will, however, create significant administrative burdens and slow the critical safety work. The bill ignores Maryland customers' desire to maintain gas service. Recently, as Chairman Hoover mentioned, we sent notices to 2,500 customers whose service lines were due for replacement, asking if they had plans to electrify so that we could avoid replacing their service if possible. Through this morning, 0 of those customers indicated an intent to electrify. We must be responsible custodians of the energy system we have while we build the system of the future. The proposed modifications create additional constraints that will slow the progress in addressing at-risk piping. Climate goals can and should be pursued in a way that does not dilute pipeline safety activities. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman and Mr. Vice Chairman, members of the committee. I'm Carville Collins here on behalf of Columbia Gas of Maryland. Columbia Gas, as many of you know, serves the 3 westernmost counties in the state. Columbia Gas is in opposition. The reasons have been well articulated by BGE and Washington Gas, so I'm not going to repeat that. What I'd like to focus on is the 2-year notice provision. Several have mentioned that perhaps an adjustment needs to be made and perhaps there are amendments that address this. Let me explain specifically why that is just simply unworkable and unrealistic and does need to be addressed if this bill is to advance. In order to preserve and protect public safety, projects recovered through STRIDE are approved by the PSC right now on an annual basis. Notification of projects 2 years in advance, as this bill would call for, would require companies to notify customers of projects not yet approved by the PSC. That's not a good position for us to be in, and may not be what the Commission would like either. When Columbia detects a leak and goes in to investigate the pipeline, in some instances we discover that the pipeline has failed, requires replacement, and it cannot be repaired. We repair when we can, as the other companies have explained. We will repair when that is possible, when that is feasible, when that makes sense. But sometimes it's not possible. In those instances, we cannot wait 2 years to make the replacement. I liken it to a slightly different analogy than the tire analogy. When your car won't start and the mechanic tells you that the battery no longer works, you need a replacement battery now. And you cannot wait 2 years to get your car back. In addition, notice requirements call for gas companies to crystal ball projects if we are to have any sort of long or extended notice period. So for those reasons, if there are amendments to address this, we would ask that the committee make sure that it's realistic and workable for the gas companies. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
No questions? I believe that concludes our hearing. Moving on to the next hearing.
How are you time at the beginning that allowed you to finish your
Okay. What was that? I think you're on the next one, yeah.
Where do you want us?
Wherever. Where's Laurel? She here? I think we're missing Laurel, but we'll get started.
I can.
Yep, sure. Okay. Mr. Chair, Mr. Vice Chair, colleagues, for the record, Delegate Lori Charkoudian requesting a favorable report on House Bill 398. This bill, I'm going to walk through what the bill does, but before I go, so the bill does a number of things that address resource adequacy. So resource adequacy is a significant conversation. I really have to start by saying I appreciate the in-depth questions and conversations we've had on this committee about it, despite the fact that, we may not agree on how to proceed with it all the time. I think there's been really important conversations. And so I want to kind of ground this bill in that broader conversation, and I have provided you with some slides that I'm going to use to do that, because I think that may be helpful to follow along. So broadly, what the bill does is it creates a market for battery storage, and that's what I'm going to spend most of my time talking about, to address the primary and urgent resource adequacy issues. Second, it changes the way that we finance solar projects. I'll talk about that as we go forward. It makes sure that our offshore wind that we invest in is actually serving Maryland load. It supports the relicensing of Calvert Cliffs, and it introduces a number of ways that we can protect ratepayers and cycle money back into ratepayers and make sure that the data centers are sort of paying their share of this project, of the resource adequacy needs. So I'm gonna, if you're following along, the third slide in your deck kind of creates, this is from 2023. And these are the numbers that you hear a lot about 40%, about this idea that we import 40% of our energy into the state. So this is the 2023 data. We generated 36 million megawatt hours. We imported 24 million megawatt hours. We used a total of 60 million megawatt hours. That's where you get the 40% from. It's worth noting here that 9 out of the 13 PJM states are net importers of electricity. So the idea behind being in PJM is that we are going to be able to access the least cost electricity, and I'm going to come back to that idea. So being a net importer by itself is not inherently a bad thing. If you think about it, we don't produce all of our food in the state. And so while I'd like to produce more of our food in the state, we actually import 95% of it. And we're not here talking about what are we going to do to have 100% of our food produced in the state. One of the reasons is because it wouldn't be cost effective to produce 100% of our food in the state. So while we want to really move towards being generating more energy in the state, we also want to do it in the context of what is the most cost effective for our ratepayers. And I genuinely believe that everyone on this committee, despite disagreements we have about how to get there, actually wants to do this in a way that's most cost effective to our ratepayers. And so I just want to walk you through how I'm proposing we can get there. So if you turn to the next page, this is the combined cycle natural gas plants in the state of Maryland. So there's been a lot of talk about gas and ideas about whether we need more gas plants in the state. I think it's worth noting, what I've done here is I've taken each natural gas plant, the total potential annual output, I calculated that by using the capacity factor, the capacity of each gas plant that we have in Maryland, and then taking out of it the outages, the projected outages, the average outages, which I got from PJM's data. And so I have the total potential, the actual from 2023, and this idea of spare output, it's not a real thing, it's why it's in quotes. But what it suggests is that if we actually ran all of our combined cycle plants in the state of Maryland all the time, with the expected outages we might have, there's another 8 million megawatt hours a year that we would produce in the state of Maryland. So that's 8 million out of the 24 million that we're currently importing. Why does that matter? Well, it's important to know that the reason we're not producing that, the reason we're importing the 8 million that we could be producing in the state, is because it's less costly to bring it in from out of state. So that's a really important piece of information as we're thinking about what our goals are and what it is we're trying to accomplish. So that's one reason. The second reason we're not using that full 8 million is because of timing of when we need it. And this gets to the most important factor in resource adequacy, which is the concept of peak load, okay? I'm gonna come back to that. The next thing that we look at is our gas peaker plants in Maryland. So I took our gas peaker plants in Maryland, and I laid out with the MDE permitted capacity. So MDE minimizes gas peaker plants are combustion turbines, they're less efficient. And with the permitted capacity, it limits. They can't run 24/7. They're limited. So I ran the numbers of the MDE permitted capacity, what they could be producing, what they do produce. And so even our peaker plants could, based on the capacity and the air permits, have spare output of another 3.4 million megawatt hours a year. So those numbers matter because, again, we're talking about we're importing because of economics, and the challenge in front of us is a peak load challenge less than a need to produce more in the state challenge. I want to put one other thing in context, which is on the next page, you'll see the Brandon Shores and Wagner generating stations. So those are peakers. And so while they represent a high capacity factor of, I think together, I don't have this on here, but I think it's about 2,000 megawatts of capacity factor, the actual amount that we have counted on those plants over the last 3 years, you can see in 2023 it was 1.1 million megawatt hours a year. In 2022 it was 2.1 million megawatt hours a year. So when we're talking about we're losing large capacity plants, that is true, but those plants were not producing 24 million megawatt hours a year. That's not the gap that we're facing.
Yeah. Can I just put a pin in this for 1 second? And I know this is going to be disruptive. However, the clerk is outside. If anybody in here has a bill that they need to drop, the clerk will pick it up right outside right now.
Oh, excuse me.
Yeah. We're well aware. We thought all 40 of yours got in on time. Okay. All right, go ahead. Sorry, Delegate.
No worries. Get your bills in. Thank you. So I just think it's important when people are worried about Brandon Shores and Wagner closing, what's the implication of the state? It's important to see what their contribution has been, because those are peaker plants, and if you flip back to the other page, you see the excess that we have in the state from other peaker plants. The other really important thing about Wagner and Brandon Shores is that according to PJM's calculation, they are replacing those what it was that those plans offered to our resource adequacy with the transmission that is expected to be built by 2028. Okay, so that's the context that's important. When we talk about all this additional energy that we could be generating in Maryland, the combined cycle, which are the more efficient gas plants, the peakers, which are the less efficient ones, which combined you have about 11, 12 million megawatt hours. I say that one of the issues is economic, so I hope we continue to take the least cost energy and have that on our grid. I hope we don't do anything that changes that, because that's what's best for our ratepayers. And the second issue is timing. And this is where battery storage comes in. So it is possible that one of the reasons that those combined cycle plants are producing energy during the day and not at night is because it's they make more money producing energy during the day. At night it would be cheaper, but the energy is not needed at night. It's needed during the day. This is where battery storage comes in. And so I just want to take a quick second to explain how battery storage works. This is the pretty picture that everyone has. Battery storage takes cheap electrons at whatever time is the cheapest, right? And often it's in the middle of the night. Sometimes it's in the middle of the day when there's a lot of solar on the grid. It takes it from whatever power plants are out there. So you see in this example, there's renewables, there's gas plants, whatever else is producing those electrons at the cheapest time of the day, when we're not in peak periods, when we're not in trouble, when we're not worried about keeping the lights on. Cheap electrons go into the battery storage. And then when we're facing peak periods, often during the day, sunset, everyone's turning on their heat, everyone's turning on their air conditioner, the battery storage releases those electrons into the grid. And so it's a way of saying, oh, we got all these power plants that could run more, whether that's renewables or gas plants. Let's have them run when they're not running, save those electrons, and then when we need them, we put them on the grid. So it's a way of using the resources that are already in our system and using those resources more effectively and more efficiently. Now, battery storage is not necessarily going to take electrons from the combined cycle plants I just described, because if there's a cheaper electron on the grid that's coming from Pennsylvania or Virginia, then that's the electron that the battery storage is going to get, because battery storage is going to take the cheapest one and then put it out when we need it. And that matters because, of course, we're still trying to get the least cost electricity onto the grid. So that's what battery storage does. And that's why battery storage, when we're talking about resource adequacy, when we're talking about how do we address peaks, not just how do we put more electrons on in general, how do we have the ability to put more electrons on, we've got ones that we're not using. Battery storage addresses the timing issue, which is the bigger problem when we're thinking about how are we going to address peak load, which is about how do we keep the lights on, which is what we've been talking about. So the next question, of course, becomes that's how they work. That's the resources we already have in the state. But what about the cost? And so there's a Brattle study. If you go to the next page, there's a Brattle study, and I'm happy to share the full study with everybody. And it looks at the levelized net cost of producing 400 megawatts of resource adequacy. And you can see that virtual power plants, which is distributed solar and storage, is the least cost way to do it. Batteries, utility scale batteries, is the next least cost way to do it. And gas is the highest cost way to do it. And so the ASAC finds a path to deploy both utility scale battery storage and grid-based, distribution grid battery storage. The last slide that I have there is just the queue, just in terms of this question about but like, is it going to come for real? And what you have there is the slide that's from PJM, which shows the amount of storage and solar that is in the queue that Jason Stanek told us was coming out in the next couple years. So that's the battery storage piece, and what the bill does is it gives us a path to get that battery storage that's in that queue that's coming out in the next 2 years on the grid as quickly as possible. In a couple minutes, we're going to hear from a battery storage company about the impact of battery storage at addressing peak issues in Texas. So you might have heard about Texas and issues in Texas with keeping the lights on. Battery storage has come in a big way in the last couple of years and been really significant there. And what I think is really important to note is that we see a massive increase in battery storage in Texas and in California. So if both of those economies, both of those markets are finding that battery storage solves the problem, they're very different policy areas, and I think that that's significant and we ought to pay attention to that. The next thing that the bill does is, as it relates to solar, we want to build solar and we want to do it in a way that really protects ratepayers. The problem with a number of the proposals we've had in the past is that when we create incentives that are high enough to build solar, a lot of those incentive money goes to solar projects that are already built, which don't need extra incentive money. So we needed a path forward that has a high enough incentive, but really is only going to stuff that's gonna get built and isn't sort of padding the pockets of those of us who have solar panels on our roof, and it's already penciled and paid for. And so the method that we use here is one that came from New Jersey, and make sure we have enough money for the solar. The other thing that it does is for utility scale solar, it uses a competitive procurement. And so anytime we do a competitive procurement, we're going to lower the cost of solar. And then in this case, any excess revenue that that developer gets goes back to the ratepayer. So it's another element of where we make sure that we're really using our ratepayer money wisely. Third, we address nuclear. There's been a lot of talk about new nuclear. This bill doesn't touch that, but this addresses the fact that we need to keep Calvert Cliffs online in order to meet our reliability issues going forward. They get relicensed in 34 and 36. Right now, there's a production tax credit that's a means-tested tax credit at the federal level. And it is slated to go away in 32. If it stays online, then this bill won't go into effect. If that tax credit goes away, then this bill goes into effect, and we create that backstop because we want to make sure that when Calvert Cliffs goes to be relicensed, they have the guarantee that they're going to have enough of that revenue to be able to get the financing to do that relicensing. Finally, I want to talk about the ratepayer protections. A number of things protect ratepayers in the bill: the competitive procurements in general, the profit sharing, the fact that battery storage in and of itself is using the resources that are already on the grid, taking the lowest, taking the electrons at the lowest cost. It's sort of a more efficient way to use all of our resources. We have price caps, we have rate impact caps. The most important thing that we're doing, though, that's new is recycling the alternative compliance payments. So to the extent that alternative compliance payments continue to be collected, right now they go into a fund at the CEF. They're supposed to be used on building new clean energy for low-income people. Over the last several years, they haven't been used in that way. What this bill does is it recycles it, it puts it back into the hands of ratepayers so that it mitigates any impact of the cost of these things to ratepayers. And second, I actually personally would prefer to charge data centers more in order to address the amount of energy that they're using in the state and the need for the reliability issues that we're moving forward with. That has not been politically possible. And so what this bill does is it says, okay, we're going to take a portion of their energy tax and we're going to put it towards this. So what it's going to do is as data centers are using more and more of our energy, putting more and more pressure on the grid, a portion of the taxes we're collecting from the amount of energy they're using is going to go towards making sure our residential customers are not paying that burden. I want to thank over 100 stakeholders who are part of building this with me. It's been a process we've been going through since April. I particularly want to thank the Public Service Commission, who has spent extensive amount of time making sure this is workable for them. They'll be up here shortly, favorable with amendments. When you have 100 different organizations and people and agencies working on a bill, even once you put it in, it's not perfect. I have a number of amendments that we've already filed, and so we sent that by email this morning when I received them. There's more amendments coming, and I would say the vast majority of the folks with favorable amendments that you're going to hear from, the majority of them I either have already put into the bill or I plan to put into the bill. I'm happy to answer questions about any of the specifics that they're proposing amendments to. I'd like to, no, I was just going to say I was going to have our battery storage expert go next. Is that okay? I do. Go ahead.
Good afternoon, Chair Wilson, Vice Chair Crosby, and members of the Economic Matters Committee. My name is James McCullough, and I'm a Utility Scale Development Manager at RWE Clean Energy. RWE is the third largest renewable energy company in the United States with more than 10 gigawatts of installed onshore wind, solar, and battery storage capacity. We have a 100 megawatt solar project in development here in Maryland, along with a 500 megawatt front-of-the-meter battery storage project located at the retired Dickerson coal-fired power plant. Both projects are in the final stages of the interconnection process with anticipated commercial operation dates in the next few years. RWE will invest the capital to develop these projects because we believe that Maryland is a place that supports growth for renewables and for its economy. I'm here to testify on the storage component of House Bill 398 and to highlight some real-life examples of storage as a proven, reliable, and very near-term solution to the issues we face today, including significant demand increases and storm outages. I'm originally from Virginia and currently live in D.C., but I lived in Texas for the last 8 years, where I worked as a geologist in oil and gas before making the switch to renewables. I lived through some of the energy emergencies in the state, including 2021's Winter Storm Uri that caused rolling blackouts, an estimated 246 deaths, and many billions of dollars in damages. Between then and now, ERCOT, the grid operator for most of Texas, has worked hard to winterize and modernize its grid, including by adding nearly 10 gigawatts of energy storage in the form of lithium-ion batteries to the generation mix. Now, when summer or winter peaks occur, ERCOT can call on storage capacity and batteries respond nearly instantaneously and provide cheap, clean power when the grid needs it most. The most recent example of this is in Winter Storm Enzo from just this past January. While Enzo was not as cold as Uri, it still represented the third highest winter demand peak ever. Batteries quickly ramped up and discharged over 3,000 megawatts in the morning on January 19th and nearly 4,000 megawatts that evening. And real-time power prices, which reflect the difference between supply and demand, remained low, getting nowhere close to the grid operator's price cap. Enzo, which is a storm event that would have represented an energy emergency just a year ago, was a non-event, and energy storage is a major reason why. A state procurement mechanism like this is critical to deploying our project and others like it that stand ready to help Maryland's reliability challenges. Thank you.
Do you want to ask? Sure. Oh, sure.
Mr. Chair, Vice Chair, members of the committee, my name is Robin Dutta. I'm the Executive Director of the Chesapeake Solar and Storage Association. We represent over 100 members, solar and storage companies who are national, regional, and local, and who do business and want to do more business in Maryland. I'm here asking for a favorable report on HB 398 because we think that this bill is focused. Energy policy is obviously very complicated, but we think this is a very focused bill, and obviously really appreciate all the sponsors' work in pulling this together, because we think that this is going to be a cost-effective path to increase generation in Maryland, increase affordability, reliability, and resiliency for the grid and for the consumers of Maryland. For starters, I want to just focus on the solar pieces. Solar prices and the cost of deploying solar has gone down tremendously. 40% in the last decade, and if you go back to 2010, depending on the market segment, residential or commercial or large scale, those cost reductions are upwards of 70 and 80%. The Maryland Renewable Portfolio Standard has also played a good role in helping to reduce costs, and the RPS has served this dual role of trying to bring down costs through seeing deployment. The solar industry is doing so much more around deployment now, and what we're looking at now is looking for a version 2 for solar deployment policies that are really focused on deployment while leveraging and utilizing all of the cost reduction work that's happened over the last couple of decades. And that's what the ACE Act does. One of the bigger components too is differentiated incentives based on what different types of projects need. That's incredibly important. We've seen that in a number of states, New Jersey, Massachusetts, Illinois, and others. And then I think the last bit is just around solar and storage can help so much around load flexibility, being able to be called on resources when the grid and consumers need it the most. And when we can do that, we can avoid a whole lot of overbuilding the grid, which can raise costs. We ask for a favorable report. Thank you.
Hello, Mr. Chairman, Vice Chair, and members of this committee. I want to thank you all for the enormous amount of time and focus on addressing the utility rate crisis that has hit home this winter. I'm Laurel Peltier, and I'm the chair of Energy Advocates, and all we work on is trying to get low-income bills, get these rates lower, and stop the terminations. But I wanted to say there are 3 very smart consumer rate relief ideas that do not cost the state anything introduced in HB 398, and I wanted to put red circles around them. They fall into 2 categories: short-term rate relief and immediate. The first is a very practical short-term idea to refund future ACP balances starting after bill implementation. The same ratepayers that are struggling to keep their power on funded this ACP balance. Given today's high compliance REC prices, electricity suppliers have paid the lower ACP fees. This large ratepayer-funded account could be refunded after implementation. A similar refund process happened during COVID in 2021 under PC 53. The PSC worked with utilities to distribute $83 million in COVID relief funds directly to residential utility bills. Another midterm idea is to redesign the SREC procurement process, which was modeled on New Jersey's state-run SREC market. Ratepayer RPS SREC investments should only go to new solar facilities. Another medium-term rate protection has been designed is about future data center tax revenues. This critical idea should be incorporated into any Maryland data center legislation as this industry takes off in Maryland. HB 398 would require that a portion of the data center tax revenue be used to pay the data center's fair share of clean energy. I really wish I had better news to report from the field about rates, especially for Maryland's 450,000 low-income accounts. But immediate rate relief is needed because we are expecting very high terminations in 2025, and thank you very much.
Good afternoon, Mr. Chair, members of the committee. My name is Rebecca Rear, and I am the Director of Climate Policy and Justice at the Maryland League of Conservation Voters, here in support of HB 398, the Abundant, Affordable, Clean Energy Act. This bill is a priority for Maryland LCV as well as an environmental community priority. The ACE Act marries clean energy deployment with innovative ratepayer protections. The coalition supporting the ACE Act represents a robust group of environmental, labor, industry, and ratepayer protection advocates. These sectors' interests do not always align, and the diversity of this coalition is a testament to the balanced and thoughtful approach reflected in the bill. Decarbonizing our electricity sector to meet state climate goals will result in up to $321 million in health benefits in 2031. The ACE Act restructures the way we incentivize and invest in solar, rapidly deploys battery storage, and supports existing nuclear in the state. Ratepayers are protected through the creation of an escrow account to be funded by ACPs and data center energy use and franchise tax. Funds in the escrow account, as you just heard, will be paid back directly to ratepayers to offset energy deployment costs. Maryland LCV is committed to clean energy solutions that increase grid reliability and decrease ratepayer impacts. The provisions in the ACE Act taken together will ensure Maryland can generate the clean energy we need, bolstered by battery storage in the state while guarding against future increases in electricity bills. Along with our testimony, we submitted coalition testimony signed by 32 organizations in support, as well as the coalition fact sheet. Thank you for your consideration. We urge a favorable report on HB 398.
Chairman Crosby, committee members, thank you for the opportunity to come here and speak in favor of HB 398. My name is Rico Albuquerque. I'm a member of IBEW Local 24, and we represent more than 2,400 electrical workers from Frederick all the way to Ocean City. You guys have heard a lot today, and I'm sure you've been hearing from your constituents about the impacts on ratepayers and how everyone is struggling with their utility bill. We believe that HB 398 solves for those things while at the same time incentivizing in-state generation, so we're not at the mercy of outside, out-of-state organizations like PJM. It creates energy resilience, a little more energy independence, and incentivizes building things in the state of Maryland, which is what my members want to do. More importantly, it sets up a procurement process for battery storage, which creates an opportunity to bid into the capacity market and get battery storage onto the grid in a way that we don't have right now. Like Delegate Charkoudian said earlier, it helps ease the peak hours, and it has ratepayer protections and labor protections. For those reasons, we're in favor of HB 398. Thank you for your time.
Delegate Adams. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Delegate, I wanted to ask a question. It's going to be narrow, and it's on page 10 of 39 of the reprint.
It's on page, I'm sorry, say it again?
Page 10 of 39 on the reprint that you have. So while you're looking for it, I just will say I got a nasty paper cut looking through your bill.
I didn't, it was not intended.
So in the preamble, it talks about energy transmission development. So that's transmission lines. When I think about Delegate Pippy, Delegate Rose, that had the Piedmont Reliability Project, I start reading for where that is in the bill, and immediately it says, and references the Delmarva Peninsula as we're talking about substations, and it also says to the extent possible upgrades to existing transmission systems, including using upgrades to the existing 138 kilovolt and 230 kilovolt transmission elements in the Delmarva Peninsula to higher voltage limits. And then it goes on to talk about offshore wind. But I'm the chair of the Eastern Shore delegation. My predecessor is sitting next to me, Delegate Ahrens. And it is not lost on me what's going on in Frederick County and that Piedmont Reliability Project. And what your bill is suggesting, which is that we're going to do anything and everything to get transmission in. I don't know what you mean in your bill. Let me start with my first very narrow pointed question.
What does it mean?
When it says when we're upgrading from 138 kilovolt and 230 kilovolt to higher voltage levels, how big is the voltage level that you're after? Should we pursue offshore wind? Give me an idea. Is it going to be as big as? Will there be eminent domain considerations? Will there be land takings on par with what's happening in Frederick County under this bill?
So let me explain what this does.
I'm asking about the size of voltage lines.
Hang on.
I need to know whether I need to alert the world on the other side of the Chesapeake Bay Bridge about what this bill does should it pass.
I think what this bill does is what it is that folks in Frederick wish the Piedmont line was doing. So let's just take a look at what the bill does. So just the context is there's a broader question about, and there already is in law, a coordinated effort to look at how we're going to land offshore wind transmission. And there's a transmission planning process to do that. The section that you just read is the part that says, to the extent possible, this transmission planning that's already going on, what we're adding to that is, to the extent possible, use upgrades to existing transmission systems before considering new transmission systems. So I think the section that, and I understand folks are concerned about what's going on with transmission. I've got another bill coming that's along these lines about how are we using what we have more efficiently. So this particular line says, when you're doing this broader transmission planning that's happening, we're adding different things that you need to do to it. But one of the things that we're adding is you need to consider existing transmission. You need to consider upgrading existing transmission before you start talking about new transmission. So right now, the existing transmission lines on the Eastern Shore are 138 and 238 kV lines. I don't know what size lines we need to make 8.5 gigawatts offshore wind. This transmission planning process is about figuring that out. And so what this bill does is it says, when you're figuring that out, before you go building new lines, take a look at the 138 and 230 kV lines and see if we can upgrade those before we start building new lines.
Yeah, I mean, I'm just trying to be this did not have to be a long back and forth. I think I'm saying that if on the bill we start talking about the Delmarva Peninsula, if you're prescribing in your bill a certain region, I mean, you're talking to the guy who's responsible, and given what's going on with Frederick, all I'm saying is I'm cautioning you as you're drafting your legislation to do things where I'm the representative amongst all of our representatives, and it would not be taken lightly what I'm reading here if it became public knowledge on the Eastern Shore in connection to what's going on with the Piedmont Reliability Project. And I really just wanted to alert you to it. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
I'm happy to talk to you more about it, but I think if you were to ask the folks in Piedmont.
Y'all can grab that offline.
I wanted to bring that up. It's my job.
Yeah, no worries. Brian?
Chair, I just kind of want to talk about, I guess, the battery storage, and there would be a subsidy in that portion of the bill that I guess more or less could impact rates and create or cause rates to go up. However, if I understand the mechanism in the bill, the ACP payments then would offset that increase. And how confident are we that it is a one-for-one, so the ratepayer ends up being neutral at the end?
It's a great question. And before I answer the one-for-one, I just want to talk about the procurement mechanism, because that's really important. The reason that we need a procurement mechanism is because the PJM markets don't sufficiently value and don't sufficiently have revenue such that a storage project pencils alone in those markets. And so the procurement mechanism requires a cost-benefit analysis that shows avoided transmission, distribution, and generation. So that's a really important thing, is that we're not going to build, this bill does not say, build 1,600 megawatts come hell or high water. It says if the projects can come in and pass this cost-benefit test, then we're going to make up for where the market failures are in revenue with this gap. And with this gap funding, so to speak. And so we have that structure, we have reason to believe in the long run is the best for ratepayers. However, knowing that that structure in the short term means putting in ratepayer money to get those savings in the long term, that is where the ACP refund and the data center money comes in. I don't have a way to know that for sure. I don't, because we don't know what those numbers are going to come in with. We don't know what's going to happen in PJM capacity markets, but we have reason to believe that, well, I'll just leave it at that. We don't, but I think that the bottom line is the structure of the storage procurement is designed to save money in the long term for ratepayers, and then the short term impact is mitigated by the transition, the ACP and the data center money.
So on the means testing then, if I understand it correctly, then that would be almost the opposite approach to a price cap, right? It like sets itself so you know how much storage to build, and then that gives you the price that is most economical, rather than saying, hey, here's X price and you got to back into it.
That's correct. So you're saying to the Public Service Commission?
Yes. Okay.
Yeah, that's right.
Okay. All right. Makes sense. Delegate Ahrens.
Chair, thank you for the presentation, and I love the graphics.
I do have two questions when I read the fiscal note. One said something about, if you could explain it to me, mandate on local governments. What does that mean?
Yeah, actually, I'm going to correct that. I think that there's municipal utilities that I didn't exempt but intended to. It's supposed, so it's not intended to have municipal utilities have to comply with storage, procurement, and some of those other things. So, yeah, we're going to address that.
That's fine, okay. And it said, it did mention we'll be garnishing funds from Reggie and CEF. What are we going to replace those funds with? Because we use those things for things.
Yeah, well, so here's the thing, it doesn't take any money from Reggie. Right now, what happens is when our, and this gets to an issue that you and I have agreed on, we have an RPS.
Not yet.
There's lots too, in addition to how good my brownies are. There's, you and I have talked about how we have an RPS that isn't sufficiently building in the state. And I 100% have agreed with that, and I've said this is a way to change it so we build in the state. But one of the problems with the RPS is the price cap that is there to protect ratepayers is also this alternative compliance payment. And so we've said, okay, if the price goes above this, don't buy a REC, put money in this fund instead. That's ACPs. That fund has grown and grown and grown within the Maryland Energy Administration. Last year, they received $300 million of ratepayer money. It's supposed to go to low-income solar, getting low-income individuals to get solar and clean energy. Instead, it sort of has been rated and used for other things. So if you look at this most recent budget, there's $150 million that's being taken out of the CEF, that's ratepayer money, that's being transitioned to balance our budget. And I'm saying our RPS was never designed to balance the general fund budget. And so we really need to make sure that any money we're collecting from ratepayers is precious money. We do not want to take it and balance budgets off of it. If it's not going to building clean energy, then it goes back to ratepayers. And that's what that does. And so I recognize that that means that MEA does not have those funds. I would argue those funds have not been effectively implemented to really benefit low-income ratepayers, and so I think this is a way better thing to do with it.
Okay. Those are your brownie points, okay? We gave you those, but now we're working on your snickerdoodles, okay? But when you look at those dollars, what's in this bill to say that those funds will be used the way you want them to be?
That instead of going into the CEF, where they get used for the grants, which is what our law currently says, they go into an escrow account that the PSC makes sure goes to.
Is that in the bill?
Yeah.
Okay, thank you very much.
Yep.
And briefly, I apologize because I missed part of your hearing, but we did review.
Do you want me to repeat it?
Please no. One of the questions what does value beyond payments received from the wholesale market mean?
Are you in the amended version?
Possibly. It's about the 2 rounds of applications and approvals by PSC for 1,600 megawatts.
Yeah.
Front meter.
What page are you on? But let me tell you broadly what we're trying to do, and then I'll this is some of the areas where the PSC and I are still working on refining the language. So I'll tell you broadly what it is, and the idea is that there is a value to storage to the state that is not captured in the PJM markets because of the way that the PJM markets, the revenue and the value of the effective load carrying capacity that the PJM has. So the job of the PSC is to figure out that value to the state through that cost-benefit analysis that's not captured in the PJM markets. And that is what we're going to sort of create a market for, so to speak, to kind of fix the brokenness of PJM in the state. So
I got it.
Does that make sense?
Tricking. Yeah, I totally get it. Also, it seems like there doesn't seem to be a requirement that utility scale facilities be built in Maryland. Would you be fine if there's any way to ensure that these?
That would be an oversight. Yeah, they're supposed to be built in Maryland.
Okay, good. Just want to make sure. Since you have an 18-month operational timeline, how would we work with that with the PJM-Q?
So it's extending to 24, but if you look at the queue, you remember you were asking Jason when he was here about what's coming out. So the timelines in here are to some extent designed for what is coming out of the queue based
What's
on.
already in the queue, basically?
It's the stuff in the queue already that we're trying to capture, not stuff that, yeah.
That makes sense. And just want to make sure we're not missing nothing. I think that's it for now.
All right, thanks.
I believe that concludes this panel.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Josh Tolkien, Adam Debitsky, Ken Phelps, Fred Hoover. Oh, apologize. Nope, Fred, you can wait a minute. Realize you have an amendment.
It's too bad. I was going to direct all the questions to him. Mr. Chair, members of the committee, I'm Josh Tolkien on behalf of the Maryland chapter of the Sierra Club and our 70,000 members and supporters. We urge a favorable report. The Sierra Club has been a long advocate for transitioning to renewable energy. 20 years ago, Maryland had some of the dirtiest air on the East Coast, impacting public health, polluting the Chesapeake Bay. Our transition to clean energy has helped improve public health, has helped improve the environment. But there are definitely opportunities for us to be more strategic in deploying the clean energy to address our reliability needs and grow our economy, and we are pleased to support this legislation. Thank you very much.
Good afternoon, Chairman Wilson, members of the committee. My name is Adam Debitsky. I serve as State Director of the Land and Liberty Coalition of Maryland. It's a project of the 501c3 Conservative Energy Network, and we urge you to consider a favorable report on HB 398, the Abundant, Affordable, Clean Energy Act. With chapters in 12 states, the Land and Liberty Coalition is unique among the various advocates for clean energy in the state. We're conservatives. And we believe that to the extent possible, market forces should be driving the transition to clean energy while protecting private property rights and expanding opportunities for landowners and their communities. Maryland's families and employers of all sizes are facing an energy price crisis that they did not cause. The problem comes down to simple economics. Too little electric supply plus unprecedented demand flowing through an outdated grid equals pain for consumers. While the current renewable portfolio standard is not entirely to blame for the growing energy price crisis, it is certainly standing in the way of its solution. Power generation and transmission technology is constantly evolving, and it's time for Maryland to modernize its energy policies. The ACE Act addresses this. As it currently works, it's cheaper for utilities to pay penalties in the form of alternative compliance payments or ACPs than it is to buy the renewable energy credits. In 2023, as it's already been said, utilities have paid a record $300 million in ACPs into the Maryland Strategic Energy Investment Fund, or SEIF, which is supposed to fund low-income solar and other related projects. But as we know, sorry about that, but as we know, during a budget crisis, the SEIF is not safe. It wasn't meant to be used as a debit card for other funding priorities, but that is exactly what has happened to it. The ACE Act reduces the reliance on ACPs in favor of set payments to the PSC to help fund actual in-state clean energy generation projects in the most cost-effective way possible by allocating funds for qualified real-world viable projects which employ Marylanders and which benefit Maryland ratepayers and Maryland consumers. It would be neither accurate nor fair to place the blame for our energy price crisis entirely on utilities, which are currently following the law as it is written, nor should we be too quick to blame so-called green energy for skyrocketing prices. Today's generation of solar panels, for example, are about 60% cheaper and 40% more efficient than they were just 15 years ago. And utility-scale solar today is now the single lowest cost of new energy, and it's also the fastest to deploy. And by creating a robust market for ever-improving storage systems, this abundant and affordable energy source will be ready when we need it, any weather, day or night. The ACE Act is an important step in the right direction for addressing our urgent energy supply challenges in the most cost-effective way. And I thank the committee for this opportunity. We urge your support for this bill.
Good afternoon, Chair Wilson and members of the Economic Matters Committee.
My name is Chip Tucker. I'm a deacon in the Episcopal Church. I serve at a parish in Calvert County and one in southern Anne Arundel County. I'm a member of the Maryland Episcopal Public Policy Network, and I'm here representing the Diocese of Maryland. Episcopal Church endorses responsible stewardship of God's creation. We believe that clean, safe, and renewable energy is essential to preserving God's creation. Meeting our energy demands has become a real challenge. We all see about the high demand for energy. And looking at our sources of power generation, having a mix of power sources is prudent, but long-term reliance on fossil fuels is not an option from an environmental standpoint. The goal should be to incentivize investments in clean, reliable energy while keeping our electric bills from skyrocketing. As of now, Maryland's falling behind in reaching its renewable energy goals. ACE Act is a step in the right direction. It incentivizes generation of clean power in-state, incentivizes investment in battery energy storage capacity to improve system reliability, provides the funding for supporting relicensing of Calvert Cliffs nuclear plant, helps protect ratepayers by using the data center tax revenue to offset energy costs, and shares profits from energy generation with ratepayers and caps the cost of clean energy programs. The ACE Act will help Maryland achieve its clean energy goals and promotes environmental stewardship. So the Diocese of Maryland requests a favorable report. Thank you.
Brad Hoover, Ryan Frederick, Sean Malone, and Benjamin Baker. Mr. McCall, are you ready? Is that true?
Chair Wilson, Vice Chair Crosby, and members of the Economic Matters Committee. I'm Fred Hoover, Chair of the Public Service Commission, and with me is Ben Baker and John Burkowski. They're both commission advisors who've worked with the sponsor regarding this bill. We are in favor of this bill with a number of amendments, but I want to touch on a couple of sort of overarching thoughts regarding the proposal. First is the procurement targets, particularly to the new energy sources and the timetables, are aggressive. And I think we need to recognize that it's the nature of this kind of business that it's going to be difficult to meet both the deployment targets and the timetables. The utility companies that are going to be required to put forward the projects are going to make their best efforts, but a lot of times these things are controlled by events beyond their control and our control and your control, world events and things like that. The second issue is that there's been a lot of discussion today about the concern about how much power Maryland imports and the desire to have more homegrown energy. Well, the flip side of that is that the energy facilities that are constructed, whatever they are, batteries, solar arrays, power plants, transmission lines, have to go somewhere. And so consequently, they're going to wind up in somebody's backyard. And as all of you are acutely aware of, citing proceedings before the Public Service Commission can become fairly publicly contentious proceedings. And so to the extent that we incentivize and encourage more development of energy projects within the state of Maryland, the flip side of that coin is more citing, potential citing controversies. The third is this bill proposes a fairly dramatic change in the way the Public Service Commission operates. I mean, historically, we have reviewed energy projects and proposals that are pitched by private companies. This bill would now have us more in the involvement as almost the developer and under the procurement authority that's being asked by us. And so we've done this in limited circumstances with the offshore wind and in the procurement of electricity for standard offer service. But this would very directly involve us in reviewing project proposals and trying to meet the timetables and goals of this legislation. It's going to require a lot of new and different expertise at the Public Service Commission. I'm not saying that we can't do it, and we're perfectly willing to do it. But again, I want to caution you that it's going to take time and effort to make this successful. And with that, we'll respond to any questions. And like I said, John and Ben have worked with the sponsor on the amendment package, and we have, as she alluded to, there are further discussions on that.
Thank you, Chair, Vice Chair, members of the committee. Thank you for the opportunity to testify on House Bill 398, the ACE Act. Delegate Charkoudian, I also want to thank you for all of your work and particularly to hold PJM to account. My name is Joanne Frederick. I'm president of Stop NPRP, here to express support for HB 398 with amendments. This legislation takes an important step in advancing Maryland's energy future by expanding renewable energy procurement, increasing storage, and improving transmission planning. However, I am concerned without key amendments, the bill risks transmission expansion. We certainly know the proposed NPRP will have significant negative impact on our farms and environment, and we'd like to avoid another fight like that in the future. We urge the committee to adopt amendments to require cost-benefit analysis before any new transmission is considered, to compare the transmission expansion with alternative grid solutions like energy storage. Mandate undergrounding for any new transmission projects unless proven unfeasible. There are options to use high voltage direct current and dielectric cables that, while viable, are often overlooked. Limit expansion to existing infrastructure corridors such as highways and railways rather than seizing private land. There are some very interesting projects in Minnesota doing just that. And ensure ratepayer protection by preventing unnecessary transmission costs from being passed on to consumers. We have provided additional detail in our written testimony. These changes will help protect landowners and ratepayers. We urge a favorable report with amendments. Thank you.
Good afternoon. On behalf of the Associated Builders and Contractors, my name is Sean Malone. We thank the sponsor for introducing this bill. We're always happy when people are looking to build things in the state. The amendments we seek are not significant, but it does go to terminology. We've asked for an amendment with regard to the term community benefit agreement. Instead of referred to as a workforce agreement, what's really being asked for is that contractors agree with an energy company as to certain terms that would take place on the work site. We're comfortable doing that. We would also request that we delete lines 24 and 25. Merit shop contractors and our employees don't strike, lock out. We don't have those types of disruptions. Frankly, we don't have those disruptions in Maryland on construction sites, but it's not something that's in the control of energy company or a general contractor. That would need to be worked out with the labor organization and a contractor. Finally, with regard to disputes on the job site, we're happy to agree with the energy company to work out terms or disputes on the job site, and if need be, have a third party intervene. With that, we submit.
I just wanted to briefly thank Chairman Hoover for your comments. The point you were making about citing and the nature of the proceedings can be contentious. I'm happy to hear that that happens, because in your commission's responsibility is to hear both sides. And I'm only commenting for the purpose of saying that I hope we always have in these citing conversations the deliberation and the opportunity for the folks who are aggrieved, those that are inherently against it for whatever reason, will always feel like they have the ability to share that voice. And frankly, to the extent that they're able to share it with authenticity, with some legitimacy, could actually win some of these, because on the Eastern Shore, as you're well aware, there are many different projects that come forward, and we worry a great deal as policymakers on the Eastern Shore that we are losing or diminishing our ability to stand up for the land use concerns that come up. And I don't need to comment on it. I just wanted to thank you for sharing that tenor in your testimony. Thank you.
Good afternoon, Mr. Chairman. My name is Alex Pavlak. I'm a PhD engineer from Severna Park, chairman of the Future of Energy Initiative. And I'm sorry?
I apologize. There's a lot of noise in the back. These microphones pick up everything. Thank you.
Chairman of the Future. Chairman of the Future of Energy. All right. I'll start from the top. Alex Pavlak. I'm a PhD engineer from Severna Park, chairman of the Future of Energy Initiative, and my advocacy is numbers. I build systems. In my world, we would proceed when we look at, I want to look at this from 20,000 feet, a high-level overview of what decarbonization is. And in my world, the way we would proceed is you first establish a purpose, a goal, which is finally happened. We now have a decent goal, net zero electric power. That's technology agnostic. It doesn't tell you how to do it. It tells you what to do. Based on that goal, we then explore all of your options. Wind, solar, nuclear, hamsters and exercise wheels, the whole 9 yards of possibilities. We look for precedented systems and we conduct experiments, prototypes, gather data basically to reduce risk and answer unanswered questions. Once we characterize the options, wind, solar, nuclear, et cetera, we then make a political choice. Which one do you want to develop? And that's a value choice. It's not necessarily the cheapest, could be the prettiest or the most reliable or whatever. But you do that based on fact, not opinion. The third step in this sequence is you develop a risk management development plan, and then you begin development. You start pouring foundations and building things after you have a clear idea of how everything fits together. The effort here is, I see a lot of guesses at solutions. 100% renewables, 8,500 megawatts of offshore wind, 150 megawatts of distribution, 1,600 megawatts of storage. There's not a lot of evidence to support this at this point. How does the whole system fit together? It's when you look at the cost of wind, for example, it's not the cost of a wind turbine, it's the cost of the whole system with and without wind. And we have not reached that level of detail and thoroughness in this kind of a transition. What I'm seeing here is the same sort of thing that went on in the Pentagon 10, 15 years ago when they're trying to work their way out of the, the military-industrial complex and serve the warfighter. We're not doing the homework, and we do have precedented systems. Ontario, Canada is a
I'm giving you a little more than 2 minutes. You gotta have to wrap it up.
yeah, okay, fine. I'll hold it there. Yeah.
Okay. I see one question, Steve.
1.5. But, thank you for coming. I always appreciate your graphics. I see here, one of the things you mentioned was wind. And in your graph, you said Ontario, your model You say they discard what? It says curtailed. Currently, 50% of the wind is curtailed. Can you help me out with why that is or what that means?
Ontario, several of the people in my group are from Canada. And so we have a good insight into what happened in Ontario, Canada. And in 2004, their grid was as dirty as ours, where they were in basically the same situation. They had the similar renewable resources, roughly the same size, and they went wind, solar, nuclear, the whole 9 yards. They completed their transition of cleaning up their grid in around 2016. They're 95% carbon-free now, and they've been that way for what, 8 years? And but half of the wind that they generate is being curtailed. This was not without incident. You know, they didn't plan this out as thoroughly as we would do in the Pentagon these days. What they discovered is in 2016 is middle of the night, low load, lots of wind blowing. Everything on the grid is throttled down as far as it'll go. You know, the Niagara Falls, everything is dialed way back, and they got to shut something more down. And the law said they'll shut down the nuclear and they'll keep the wind. And that's what they did. And that went on for a period of a year. And the problem is that after a couple hours, the wind goes away, and it takes 3 days to restart the nuclear. So they have to turn back on the fossil fuel to keep the lights on until the nuclear comes online again. And it took them a year to get their dispatch order, to convince the politicians they ought to change the dispatch order. That when they have too much energy and you need to shut down wind or nuclear, you shut down the wind and not the nuclear. And nowadays, half of the wind that's being generated is either being outright curtailed or it's being sold to the Americans at 10 cents on the dollar. The point I want to make is you have to look at how the whole system works.
Okay.
You can't just look at offshore wind as a standalone unit.
Yeah, my last question will be, you alluded something about the battery. Is the battery in this mix reliability, or what's the battery for that?
Batteries, we do modeling all sorts of different ways. And we've done, in California and Texas, we find that batteries do have some limited value. It's basically to carry over the solar to level out the solar peak during the day, to shave the peak. Maryland doesn't have that kind of sun. When we run battery models in Maryland, it's a wash up to a point, up to maybe 15–20% combination of solar and batteries, but then starts taking off like a skyrocket. You can't get to zero that way. The serious issue with batteries is that sooner or later, you're going to discharge the battery, and then you're really sunk with a need for power and nothing available. And this generally happens in December when photovoltaics are low, the wind is low, and the Germans have a name for it, the Dunkelflaut, where you have a 2-week period with no renewables, and that drives the whole size of the system. That one event to keep the lights on, that drives the whole size of the system when you're dependent on renewables. Bottom line is, from my background, we have not done the homework here. There's a lot of work that needs to be done in order before you start spending serious money.
Okay.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
All right. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
We have 2 information, MEA. Guys, come forward, please. Okay.
Thank you. Thank you, Chair, Vice Chair, ECM. I'm Ryan Opsahl, I'm the Director of Policy at the Maryland Energy Administration. Firstly, MEA does very much appreciate the bill sponsor working with us on this legislation. With complex legislation on this of this caliber, it's very important to have that level of coordination. Secondly, as a point of clarification on our written testimony, we included a roughly 1.5 gigawatt storage number for California. To be clear, this is 1.5 gigawatts resulting directly from PUC-based procurements. The aggregate amount of storage that has been deployed in California is actually much higher, roughly around 11 gigawatts of utility scale. MEA does find the storage provisions in this bill encouraging, and it is particularly important to support larger late-stage projects that are already in PJM queue, in addition to especially long-duration storage. On to ACP. So ACP would be modified by the bill, which does currently accrue in the CEF, which MEA uses to fund clean energy projects in the state for overburdened and underserved communities as required by law. MEA has spent significant portions of this money on new and existing programming directly impacting such LMI households, including the Solar Energy Equity Grant Program, where we just extended the application deadline for FY25 funding, and the Solar Access Program, which was set up as a result of the Brighter Tomorrow Act of 2024. This money has been spent. It has been spent on LMIOU households and has been spent in significant sums. Finally, our written testimony and my comments today are in reaction to the bill as introduced. I thank the sponsor for sharing the amendments this morning, but the agency is still working our way through them at this time. This concludes my comments. Thank you.
Before my colleagues go, I do have a few questions. How much money is currently in CEF from the ACPs?
The delegate, I believe, did have an accurate figure. It's roughly over $300 million. Now, that is not, my budget person would probably yell at me along with Director Prince. That's not all there. I mean, some of it has been, of course, appropriated. As the delegate mentioned, some of it has been transferred out, but significant portions, I believe it was roughly $50 million in FY24, and I believe we're on track for about $100 million for FY25 to be spent on these LMIOU households.
Right, and I guess because it looks like there's a budget proposal to take about $150 million out of the ACP for the budget, not for the clean energy. What is your stance on that?
The 150 million, I believe, was already transferred out, right?
Sure. My point is, because I guess my point is, it was never meant for that. It wasn't meant to be balancing the budget, right? It was meant, so why shouldn't we immediately give it back to the ratepayers in the form of relief?
Look, I understand that the budget is obviously in a very tight spot at this point in time. I do think, though, that if that money were removed, it would be directly impacting these programs, which do directly benefit these households. I mean, the Solar Energy Equity Program that I just mentioned provides $25,000 per household. And then if you can install, of course, solar on your household, then you're able to reduce your cost from that as well.
And now, these funds, ACP is not the only way that MEA funds these programs, correct?
Correct.
So there are other ways of still continuing these programs, even if this bill were to be passed in its current form, correct?
We do get a significant portion of our funding from RGGI.
I'm sorry, apologize?
From RGGI.
Right,
Yes.
so these programs aren't necessarily, if we decide to give ratepayers back some of their money, these funds aren't really, these programs aren't necessarily decimated. They'll still have some access to revenue, correct?
These particular programs, it's feasible that we could. However, that RGGI money is also committed to other programs as well.
Right.
So, I mean, there would be some opportunity costs there that would have to be figured out.
Gotcha. Brian?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Just to follow up on that, I think the bill doesn't say you can't use the money for what it's supposed to be spent on. I think what it's saying is after those programs, if there's funding left over, then that reverts back to the ratepayer, correct?
I could be mistaken. That I don't believe was our read on that particular portion, but if that is
I mean, I guess
correct.
what we're saying it's not a slush fund for MEA to then turn around and subsidize the budget on the backs of ratepayers just cause.
That is not the intent. I mean, at least for MEA, we take that money and do exactly what we are required to do with it by law.
Okay, that's a weird interpretation, but okay.
Seeing no further questions, I believe that concludes this hearing and it concludes the hearings for today. Colleagues, we do have a 1 to 6 p.m. There. I said for 5:30, I'm sure, but I understand, we all have, but if you can, Stephen.
I appreciate hearing from you anytime, Chairman.
Always. Thank you guys very much. Have a wonderful day and thank you for coming.